Hello. Welcome to Bad Introduction Music, Volume 7.
Yeah, I was going to whistle the Doctor Who theme over that, but I was afraid that YouTube's copyright algorithms would kick in.
Yeah, we don't want that. They're even saying the word 3 times, like the Candyman, you pull out the YouTube copyright police if we continue to talk about it. Hello to everyone in the live chat. I will say right up front, any audio issues or visual issues, please just kind of scream at us in the live chat, keyboard warrior away, and we'll try our best to address this live. But hopefully no gremlins. Last show went quite well in that regard. I think we've nailed down OBS and streaming through Skype.
With a cool amplitude modulated chopper effect in your voice, people are going to ask for that to come back.
That's why I brought good point. The chopper Dalek effect, a somewhat related audio effects. Not quite the Radiophonic Workshop ring mod sound. I won't give YouTube brownie points for that just yet. But Chris, Meyer, how are you?
I'm doing great. Always never enough time to do everything you want to do. But other than that, I'm doing great.
Yeah. June Lopez, wrong with the audio. People let me know if there's anything wrong with the audio. I don't think there is. Maybe they're joking. Ben's audio audio and video's right so far. Thank you, Roman. Dark Sparkler, Ben's audio needs more AM. Kyle, Dark Sparkler, king of the Buchler AM patch at the moment. He's unhappy unless life has AM on it. We need to get you a t-shirt, Kyle. AM is life or something like that.
Yeah.
Some kind of hippie image in the background as well. But this is Feeding the Tardis, episode 2, the second of 3 episodes. The name Tardis is the nickname lovingly given to Chris's live Eurorack performance case, and it came from a joke that it is larger and more powerful on the inside than the outside would suggest, I believe.
The slow reveal there.
That needed the doo.
Yeah, there you go. Or some Cyberman sound. But yeah, but it's only half full. We need to keep feeding this sucker.
Yeah, so this is episode 2, as I say. The first episode, we looked at the bottom section, and we'll be looking at the top 6U of this case. I will pull up an image. Here's what we'll be looking at today, this top 6U section. A nice selection of modules. I'll have the modular grid link in the live chat in a moment. But have we anything to start with, Chris, to pull us over from episode 1 without repeating ourselves too much? Of course, I'll link back to episode 1 as well.
Yeah, the last thing we were talking about before was heat issues. Because I felt that when I had been playing with this previously, that the mixer in the bottom part of the case was getting very hot. And it does draw a heck of a lot of power. That's why I have 2 power supplies at the bottom part of the case. So I put a little Mutant modular fan synth into the bottom part of the case right next to it. And, was that little fan going to make any sort of difference? And it did. It ended up making, let me check my notes here to be sure. It ended up cooling off the case by about 11 degrees Fahrenheit, about 8 degrees Celsius. It was really quite an amazing transformation because before that, the top was getting to 105, 110 degrees Fahrenheit or over 40 degrees C, which was too hot to run a module, to be honest.
Yeah.
And now I'm keeping it in the 90s, about 37, 38-ish C, and that's in the operating range where I feel a lot more comfortable. Some other random modules were getting hot too. I mentioned that I was having trouble with my micro braids going out of tune. I found out that was getting quite hot as well, and now it's a few degrees cooler. So just putting in a little fan down here next to my hottest module. I actually blocked off part of the gap between the modules to make sure I was drawing air across the mixer instead of just from a gap next to it. And it worked better. And I understand you've been in touch with the folks at Mutant, and they are going to make more fan synths.
They are. I spoke to them earlier on Instagram, and we will have last parts arriving for the batch fairly soon. So maybe this summer. I don't really have an accurate date. I didn't get one. Nor did I ask for an exact date either. But yeah, the wording was that they've got some parts in, and I think I'm going to pick a couple up. I think I didn't. I saw the little fans. I thought, what a great idea. But was somewhat sceptical of how effective it would be, but it's definitely pulled your case down enough for me to think, that's really useful.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised.
Omri in the chat, hello, and I'll grab a link to that as well. So that's down into an operating range that your electrical engineering friends have said is a better range, or the correct range to not go above, right?
Right. I talked to a few engineers about how hot should these things be getting, and I'm measuring the front of the case, not even the inside. And it was way over that range before, and now it's inside that range. And it's the old thing people say, well, I've not had any problems. Well, it hasn't blown up or smoked or anything, but I have had problems with the micro braids going out of tune and more noise than I thought I should have in this case. So, yeah, I'm happy I found 4 HP for it.
And I've just put a link to the fan module in the chat for anyone curious. There's no additional gaps in your case, is there? You haven't left gaps at one side and the fan at the other.
There is one more 1 HP gap down on the left side of the case, and that's mainly because I know I needed some extra space to run cables next to the micro rings, the rings clone. Okay. I know things were getting very tight when I run cables there. So I did have 1 spare HP down here. I used it next to the rings. And but I've made a point of keeping it far away from the mixer so air would get drawn across the mixer to help cool it off.
Yeah. Couple of questions, and we can see you in the live chat, and we will be watching you in the live chat. Ed Random, how many amps are you running through it? Do you know the current draw of each side?
Well, let me see. I've got a modular grid here, so let's go ahead and pan down here. Yeah, the total case draws just under 3.4 amps on plus 12 and close to 1.8 amps on minus 12. And more of that was coming from the bottom. It was 1.92 amps on the bottom for plus 12 and 1.1 amps roughly on minus 12. Yeah, that's a lot of current, but a lot of that came down to the WMD performance mixer. It has a lot of VCAs in it to be able to do CV panning, CV volume, etc. And that generates a lot of heat. So between that and its expanders, it was drawing almost 0.8 of an amp just for the mixer. So that's why I've got 2 constant lab power supplies down there.
Yep, we did touch on power in episode 1, so we won't focus too much on that, but just to answer these initial questions as we get going. Cat Scan Meow, won't a DC motor from a fan add a bunch of noise to the system?
Yes, it can add a bunch of noise to a system. And that's why I made a point of plugging in that particular fan to the digital bus that other things like the sequencer was on, and I kept it away from the bus that analog sensitive stuff like the mixer was on. In an ideal world, if someone made a fan module in the future, they should draw it from the 5-volt bus, because 5 volts only power microprocessors, etc. They don't power audio, so you don't worry about noise in that particular bus. So I do wish that the fan synth drew its power only from plus 5 would be even quieter.
Yeah. And then Ed Random again, proper power supplies will take care of the heat sinks and all. Well, a linear power supply, which is maybe what some people would think of as a proper power supply, will generate quite a lot of heat. What's your take on that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, actually, linear power supplies, although they're quieter, so they burn off half of their energy just as heat. For example, if you're drawing 3 amps worth through your modules, the power supply is converting the equivalent of that, a linear supply is, into just heat before it even gets to the modules.
Yeah.
So it would actually make the whole case run hotter. More efficient power supplies, like the switching constant lab power supplies that are in here, run cooler, and also it's the split system. So I have big bricks on the outside that are doing most of the heavy work, than just little down converters inside here. But yeah, actually, good power supplies, the trade-off is that they even run even hotter.
And let's say last couple of questions for now in the live chat before we dive straight in. We've quite a lot of modules, nearly 30 modules to get into the top of this case today and talk through the intentions and what they are, of course. Derek Doherty, the case is drop dead gorgeous. It's a Ross Lamond case. Yeah. Unfortunately, well, he's around 18 months into his retirement, I think, but he's wrapping up the last few of the cases that he's building. Ross did some truly stunning work, so if you see a Ross Lamond case secondhand anywhere, you'll be in safe hands, but they won't be Ross's hands if it's secondhand. That's a lot of hands in a sentence. Yeah. Yes, Ross Lamond case.
English Pippi Oak, if anyone's curious. It is a beautiful case. And as I mentioned before, when I went to go buy a case from Ross, I was originally looking at your standard black Tolex covered road case. And he was even going to drill it out a little bit to make it even lighter for me. But then I said, well, Ross, you're known for the exotic woods. Show me what you've got. And he showed me this case. I just could not say no. So even though it is a few kilos heavier, about 6 pounds heavier to carry through airports, and I do have a wheel cart to carry through airports with, it just is worth it because I smile every time I see it. Other people smile at it. It's not just another black or aluminum case. So yeah, sometimes you need to do stupid things because they're nice.
Well, you don't say to Ross, show me what you've got, because he'll take that as a challenge. And perfectly for us, these are the kind of things he comes back with. So that's great.
Yeah.
We did have another question from Stub Effects. Will your contact mic pick up the fan's mechanical noise? How acoustically loud is it, or mechanically loud?
Okay. I'll go back in camera here. I used to have a contact mic in the case. I used to have Mutable Instruments ears in here, and I was very sensitive to knocking on the case. And I actually used that to my advantage, where I would brush cables, knock on the case as a way of playing the case. I've now switched to Bafaco instrument interface that does not have a mic built into it. My mics are external, and I actually have my Fulltech Nano Garden on actually a microphone spider web mount here, so it does not pick up acoustic noise as easily. And the same thing with a microphone that I sometimes have here as well. So I'm not so worried about acoustic noise. I also have added a Erica Pico mod that I'm using as a downward expander or as a noise gate, so that when things get below a threshold, it automatically shuts down the VCA and cuts that off too. So I'm not that worried about the fan noise. It does kick in a little bit. Like as I turn on this bottom unit now, there we go. You'll hear we're up a little bit. I don't know if you can even hear that. It's not too bad.
Tiny bit as you...
Yeah. Yeah, it's not bad.
As you really get against it. But yeah. Okay, well, we should dive straight in. So as we move across to getting into modules, let's take a look at the case, just as Chris moves the camera. So it is the top row. As you said, this is effects, pattern generation, and percussion. And that's where we'll get to at the end of tonight's live stream. We'll have the case full, and then a follow-up next Wednesday, which will be the 8th of July, same time, 8 p.m. UK time. That's 12 midday on the West Coast, 3 p.m. East Coast, 9 p.m. Central Europe, European time. We'll have some patches and some examples. So where are we starting, Chris? First modules.
I'm starting with the heartbeat of the case, my master clock for the whole case, and it's a Pamela's new workout. Not only does it have 8 programmable outputs, and I'll explain how I'm taking advantage of those, that it can do different clock divisions, LFOs, random signals, etc. Something that's coming very handy is it does have a big tempo readout on it. And it's surprising how few modules in Eurorack have a tempo readout. And this has proven to be pretty essential in live performance. Jim Coker and I, playing as Meridian Alpha, were playing at Noisebug earlier this year, actually. And I had accidentally set a song for 133 BPM when it's supposed to be 113. And when we started out, nothing was working. All the echoes were out of time. The arpeggiations weren't working with the drums. And I looked at the display and went, a digit's wrong. So I slowly brought the tempo down one at a time. And you could hear the piece just like, lock into place.
There you go.
And you could see the audience was kind of like, oh, cool. They went from chaos into order. And we're just like, we found out what was wrong. We fixed it.
We've got a not black enough comment in the live chat for the recent black edition of Pamela's new workout. That was
I missed that. By the time I found it, they had sold out on it.
Yeah.
But I'll live.
Limited run.
I also am using... Go ahead.
I was just going to say that for people that don't know, there was a black panelled Pamela's workout that was a very limited run, but all profits going to various charities selected by people that work at the company. So nice thing that ALM did recently.
So in addition to having Pamela, I have one of their expanders, which has a MIDI out and a DIN sync out. And you'd be surprised how much equipment runs on DIN sync out there, along with a few common divisions as well. I'm driving so many things in this case from clock, I needed more clock outs. But when I play with other people, like I'll send the guitarist the MIDI out, which is MIDI clocks, so they can synchronize their delays to whatever tempo I'm working at.
Yeah.
And I actually send DIN sync over to my friend Jim Coker when we play Meridian Alpha, and he then has his vector sequencer, in his case, follow my DIN sync. So he's always locked to my tempo, my starts and stops, etc.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, I've added to the back of my expander a little extra cable off of the DIN sync jack that I run inside my case down to the bottom half, so that my own vector sequencer is also following DIN sync from Pamela. So whenever I start and stop Pamela, my vector sequencer starts and stops, and it follows its tempo. I think you've got a drawing there how I was hollowing out some channels in the wood to run the cables between the two halves of the case.
Yeah, so that is an internal socket, jack socket, that this cable, image should come up now, just kind of hacked away around the back of the rail by the looks of it to manage to fit in the sync cable between the two halves of the case.
Yeah. So I'm just getting everyone arranged. Here's my live connection to that. And I actually made a point of using the same wiring as Arturia does for their 3.5 millimeter version of DIN sync. So that if I need to, I can break that out and plug something else into it instead.
Yeah.
And the way that I've got Pamela set up in here is I have a few different clocks going out of it. I have like one of the outputs going to 24 ppqn, because that's how you get the most resolution out of grids,
Yeah.
which is what I'm using for most of my sequence, for most of my drum patterns. But I have several other things in the case, including my marbles, my the way I happen to run Euclidean circles, some other modules, the 1/16 notes, and I give them that. And then I have a couple other free agent outputs that I use to go ahead and make them eighths or quarters, maybe 8 beats, so they're every 2 measures, every 1 measure, to give me a long timing scale to trigger some stuff as well. So for Pamela, the top set of jacks are different clock divisions, as well as down here in the expander. They go to different modules. And then the bottom row of jacks, I have things like a timed LFO that's timed to run over 16 bars. I have a couple random CV outs, etc., that I then will use to modulate and wild patch to other things that I want to modulate in time with my tempo.
Yeah, Pamela's, well, it's very indulgent, but Pamela's an octo controller from Abstract Data and a chaos divider from Cylon Labs is my triple heartbeated studio heartbeat. I don't know what to say. Trying to think of something either TARDIS heartbeat or monster related. I couldn't think of any on the spot. But yeah, the PAMs and the octo controller, have both. It's a force to be reckoned with, as is the chaos divider. I get a lot of quick moving interesting divisions from that.
Yeah, that's cool too. So another thing I like about Pamela is not only does it work nice as a master in my case with a stop start button and a tempo display, is it can follow external sync as well. I can send it a clock and a start stop signal. So when I play with people who are using Ableton Live, I use this little box called the Missing Link from Circuit Happy. And it hooks up to the Wi-Fi clock coming out of Ableton Live and generates tempo, clocks, start stops that I can then plug into Pamela and have my system then follow, say, Ableton Live that someone else is using. And this is what I'm using right now. It's a little standalone box, but I'm very excited that they are working on a 2 HP version of this.
Okay.
That will go into your Eurorack case, including the Wi-Fi receiver and all that. And he's shown a little video of it on Instagram. It's not, it's not vaporware. We're expecting it maybe this fall. And I'm keeping some space free in my case so I can put the 2 HP version of this in my case later on to make it easier for me then to jam with Ableton Live users.
Yeah. How's the latency with that device?
I haven't had a chance to really time it out. I have a little separate case that has an Expert Sleeper's ES8 in it, and I like to run lots of timing signals into it, record all of them on my computer, then compare the timings just to check out latency. I've not had a chance to do that with Missing Link yet, but I tend to think, Ableton's already worked out that issue anyway, since the whole idea of their link is to synchronize external devices pretty tightly.
Okay, so what goes in next?
The main clock that I use in my system is actually a version of the Mutable Instruments grids. It works really well for the way I happen to think. And the way that grids works, and this happens to be the milligrids version, there was a limited run by Lasse Sort in Copenhagen who did these, is that there's a core of 25 patterns inside on a 5x5 grid. And the X and Y controls basically move you around inside that 5x5 grid, and you've got CV over that as well. So it pulls up a core pattern or an interpolation between patterns. And then you've got different sliders to say, what's the density of triggers based on that pattern, from being off for maybe something like a beat, every measure, to just like slamming 16th notes or even 30-second triplets. So I like this because I can pick a core, the hi-hat, and then there's a separate chaos control that will say, let's go wander off the map and come back to where we were. And that whole idea of resolving is also something that's really important to me when doing music. An issue with random-based music is that if you don't resolve, people pick up pretty quickly that it's just random.
Yeah.
It's not that intentional or purposeful. So I like the idea of having something where I can pull the chaos control back down, and then I can resolve to what my initial pattern was.
Yeah.
So I like this one. Go patch in a couple chords here.
Yeah, well, you're screwing that in. Johnny Midnight asked, I wonder if FSS, Future Sound Systems, named Stum after the Stum grenade in Judge Dredd. I thought it was a reference to Stum, as in keep stum, keep quiet, being a mute module, so keep it in there. Yeah, Stum grenade. Maybe I need to watch Judge Dredd again.
Well, considering that his other module was also kind of made on a pronunciation play on what its actual function is, I'd have to think he's doing the same thing here.
Yeah. Marked Modular Synth mentions mentions that they struggle with the screen at times on Pamela's. So they say, I guess I need an eye test. And Quantum Space, the man with the knowledge, says to ask you about the screen as you modded your screen on Pamela's new workout, right?
Yeah, let me see how tightly I can zoom in on this. This is already screwed in. There we go. I took my screen out. For some reason, he chose to put a big red LCD between the display, or bright OLED display, and the front. Kind of makes it look retro, but I thought it makes the display very hard to read. So I undid all of the nuts for the jacks, undid the nut holding down the encoder, pulled off the front panel, and the little red bezel was just loose here in front of the display. So I just took that away, reassembled everything, and I have a really sharp, clear, easy-to-read display. It's much easier. Once he saw that I did that on Instagram, he was like, that voids the warranty! And you probably should put it like a piece of clear transparency film instead, just to protect yourself from poking that display. But boy, it has made Pamela so much more usable for me.
I'm trying to see if I can find the post to give these kind of things are what you give a lot of your Patreon supporters. Well, all of the Patreon supporters a glimpse in.
Well, that one I did happen to put up on Instagram as well.
I can certainly get a link to your Instagram as you screw things in, whether I can find the post
Yeah,
or not.
I'm adding another molt I forgot to put in down here too. Next to, and I'll back off a little bit again so people can see what I'm doing. I also have an additional molt next to the bottom portion of my expander for Pamela. Frame this so you can see it better. So that I can go ahead and split out more of the clocks, because I find that particularly the 16th notes I had sent to a lot of modules. So I take the divide by 4 out of here, the multiply by 4, and split it again with the multiples and send that to more modules. I even send it to the LFO on the twin waves in the bottom part of the case. I can synchronize that LFO too if I want to. So molts are us. I have found that Pamela can drive a lot of modules at once.
Yeah.
Particularly since I've split things up with the expander and the jacks in the front panel, so I don't use a buffered molt for that. I'm happy with a passive molt just to split its clock signals around. There we go.
Okay, and I found, for a clear image, that was the Instagram post on the...
Oh yeah, there's a little red bezel sitting in front of the jacks down there.
Yeah, you can see it just just cuddled into a tendril cable there.
Yeah, and you can see how much brighter and easier to read that display is.
Yeah.
I find it to be a very worthwhile mod, even if it voids your warranty.
Napoleon in the chat asked, do you sequence outside of the grid, and if so, how do you go about it? I don't know if they mean outside of grids, the module, or outside the grid as in off the grid musically, delayed timings and things like that. Let's maybe go with that as the first question, whether that's the one they meant or not. Do you get off the musical grid?
Okay, as far as off the musical grid, I tend to be very tempo locked. I like a groove. I do have a delay section down here that I'll be showing a little bit later on. But I tend to do things that are tied to our subdivisions of the grid. I do all sorts of things to play around with what's on that grid, with probability skippers and logic modules, etc. And I do have a few more pattern generators besides just grids that I'm also about to install. To get away from just grids, I like to have different varieties of patterns in the system and mix them together, combine them, etc. But I do tend to, go on things that are based on the grid, because I guess there's still part of me that likes the idea of keeping the dance floor, even when I'm doing kind of ambient-ish stuff. I find that I know a lot of people do some really cool off-grid stuff. This is just how I happen to work.
Yeah. And in terms of if they meant out of grids, as in not sequencing with grids, you just addressed that some things were going there. And there was also a vector sequencer in the
there's a vector sequencer in the bottom part for doing notes. But then I'm going to install a few more modules here to give me different variations. So although grids is at the core of what I do, it's by no means the only thing I do. For example, this has, nice ability to interpolate between patterns and control densities, and has a chaos function to go ahead and bring in randomness. And then right next to it is something that's much more deterministic, and that's Euclidean circles, very popular module. And this is one where I can dial in exactly the number of beats I want into a pattern, even pre-program them if I want to in version 2. And actually, I've been playing around. That's on my list of things to do. I have fun with Euclidean patterns in here, particularly for top sections like hi-hats and things like that. I'll show you how I combine things here in a second. But I've also developed an interest in Indian tal rhythms, which are an interesting way of combining like 3s over 2s and stuff like that. So I'm going to program a series of tal rhythms into my user tables inside Euclidean circles. So I have that as well.
Nice. I think you did mention, but I didn't catch the name either. June Lopez asked, where can they get that version of grids? You said it was a limited run?
Is a limited run. There's a person in Copenhagen called Lasse Sort, Lasse Sort, S-O-R-T. I don't know if he has any more left. They were extremely reasonable, but he's also said, unfortunately, he's not going to run anymore. I just find it a nice compromise between a full-size grids, which is what I started with in this case, but I always need more space. I've got 29 modules and counting in here now. And a microgrids, which I found to be a little bit tight. This was really nice because he has beat indicators on the ends of the faders for the beat density, beat indicator for the clock slider as well, and I just find it easy to use.
Yeah.
There we go. Euclidean. A module I'm going to drop in a little bit later, and I want to talk about more in context, but also in terms of rhythms. I also do use a version of the Mutable Instruments marbles. And I happen to use the Codex Modulex Cara because I really like its layout. I particularly like the way they put the beats and the CVs next to each other. And I use this for modulation as much as anything, but it too can give you different rhythmic patterns as well. So between Pamela, which can do simple divisions, grids, which has patterns, the Euclidean module, and then the randomness of a marbles, I have 4 different sources in here to create my core patterns. And then I've got a couple modules to go ahead and mess them up.
That's why I like to use Cylon Labs Chaos Divider for basic divisions most of the time. It's just quicker for me to physically see a different module for a different function. Same for Euclidean circles. The Euclidean's great in Pamela's, and it's really nice you can apply Euclidean rules to things like LFOs and that can have then further randomness added to it. But I quite like each one doing its own thing really well.
Yeah, it gives me the chance to just change what I'm doing depending on the mood of the piece or to contrast 2 very different things to each other. And something that I'm really into, and we talked a little bit about this in the last episode, is the concept of building up beats and then thinning stuff back out again. I like to do that with density of notes or density of sounds. And I like to do it with beats as well. I can do it from the front panel of grids in terms of bringing up how dense a particular track is. But a module I will not be without is some form of probability skipper. Mutable instrument branches, or I happen to use the Lattic SO90 skipper. I just love this module. It's a dual channel probability skipper, kind of like branches is, but it has a couple of controls done by jumpers on it that gives you a couple of additional modes. It has 2 different modes for how it drops beats out, kind of like branches does. But it also has what's called an exclusive mode that says, if a clock's coming into the first section, definitely don't output a clock on the second section. And by doing that, you can say, make sure the hi-hat doesn't step on the kick. The hi-hat sits out whenever the kick comes in. And I've even done a little video demonstrating some of those techniques with the SO90.
Yep. Link already in the chat for that one.
Yeah. And what I have next to it, the most useful 1 HP module I've ever found, a Pequeño Interrupter from Shank Modular. And what it is a 1U module that's a bunch of switches with jumper connections on the back. So when I have a module that has jumpers that I said, I wish I was on the front panel so I could change it, I have about 3 or 4 of these that I'll use then to wire up to the jumpers on the module to bring them out to the front panel as switches. And that's why I have marked in here, different types of clustering, whether or not the beats are clustered, and E for exclusive mode.
Raskolnikov in the chat mentioned using the Skipman from West Auckland. I know Richard Devine was a big fan of that one. That's definitely a nice looking module too. And you've definitely got some I Hate Jumpers support on your side. Preferring the, I guess, to break them out as you have.
Yeah, I do. I like that. So what I'll use the skipper for is I may start with a very dense pattern on Euclidean circles or a dense pattern on grids, and then use the skipper to start with no beats and start fading up, just the occasional beat, more beats, etc., until I go up to the full density of the pattern I have programmed on these modules. And then when I'm doing a breakdown at the end of the song, instead of maybe changing how many beats are inside my Euclidean pattern, I'll just randomly start dropping out some of the beats to create spaces and openings inside the pattern. And I really love that to ramp up and ramp down energy.
Yeah. Good comment from Derek in the chat asking, do you have to power down to use the jumper switcher? I'm not sure if it's safe to do while active. Things like the Mordax data, where what you're jumper selecting is where the 5 volts power comes from, either the case or internally regulated on the module, absolutely turn off or pull the power out of data and change the jumper and put the power back in. Turn the case off is the simpler answer. But I've definitely swapped jumpers before. Of things like the dual filter from Soundforce. You can customize it to be 2 low passes or 2 high passes, and there's 2 jumpers per side. I've definitely swapped those a few times. Just unscrew it, module out, do it, push it back in. Guess it depends on what the jumper's doing, whether it's safe or not.
Yeah, we were talking about when we talked about the Monster, my big studio system, one of my filters is the Doepfer A127 triple resonance filter. And it actually has jumpers on the back, whether or not each band is a band pass or a low pass. At that point, the jumpers are really just a patch cord deciding which analog signal is being routed onto the output jacks.
Yeah.
So a jumper there is the equivalent of live patching a jack in and out.
Yeah.
But as you say, there's other functions that only take effect when you repower the module. So yeah, that wouldn't be very nice.
Yeah. A safe answer would be to turn the case off as a matter of practice if you had to go one way or the other.
But so far, I have not tried anything with the switch module, but I'm only using it for things that are basically reroutings of outputs, what poles come to the front panel, etc.
Yeah, and Vlad is in the live chat from VPME, Mr. Euclidean Circles himself, mentions that the tiny interrupter switch could also be used instead of their own 6 switches module for Euclidean circles.
Yeah, I really strongly believe that when there's options on the back panel, get the expander to bring it out. You'll not use them if you have to pull the module out. So whenever there's a module, I tend to get the expander that goes with it, or throw in something like the little interrupter here to go ahead and bring that stuff out. Just so I have more choices, particularly on the fly. It fuels creativity to hit a switch rather than like power off, hold the module, change the jumper, put it back in. No, that's not what I want. Yeah, make it immediate.
Yeah, production says should get the breakout module for the Dope triple filter. I don't have.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have a version 1 of the triple filter, and it does not support the breakout module.
There's the answer. I'm sure which version I've got, but I don't have the expander either. It's kind of big enough as it is, although the expander does add a lot. You get the individual filter type outputs, I believe.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Just the one I had didn't support it, so I improvised.
Yeah.
One issue I've had with using skippers is, like I mentioned, I am very groove oriented. I don't want to lose my audience. I mean, there is an audience for noise and avant-garde and randomness, and I'm not putting that down because it's a very cool thing. But quite often I recognize I'm playing for people who want something they can dance to, or something that sounds like the music they're used to hearing, quote unquote. So I'm very cognizant of things like give them a downbeat so they can find their way through what I'm creating. And a problem with probability skippers is that they're very indiscriminate about which beats they drop out. So I found that I quite often want a hybrid rhythm where I have the downbeat, and it might be just one beat on Euclidean circles or a clock division off of PAM, say like every couple of measures, that I then want to combine with the random beats so that there's this random pattern and always a downbeat as well. And to do that, I've become a big fan of having logic modules in my case. And I've been through a couple, and right now I'm very happy with the Anamodule Logic Ogic. Things I like about it is it has an inverter at the very top. Sometimes we need to flip signals. I'll talk about that in a couple minutes here. 2 ands, 2 ors. No, I do not have the symbols memorized, even though I am an electrical engineer. I just remember alphabetically, and, or. The A is above the O. That's how I remember it. And then he has a few flip-flops at the bottom for dividing signals coming through it as well. So you make it a frequency divider, clock divider, etc. So in this case, where I'm trying to keep the downbeat, I'll use an OR to say, if we're getting the pulse on every downbeat from Pamela, or we're getting the random dropped beats from the probability skipper, then send something to the output to the drum module that it's triggering, combining those two patterns together. And there's other times where I'll use an and instead, saying the worlds have to align between two patterns, like a kick and snare pattern, to then hit a third thing like a splash. And I have a video I've done called Logical Beats, where I go through some of these permutations with things like the Logic Ogic.
Yep, I will link that one as well. I've just put a link to my demo of the Logic Ogic in there, and here's Chris's video on Logical Beats. It's an interesting one. I miss when I don't have that in the case or to hand, and it's still here. I do really like the Logic Ogic. I miss the flip-flops because you can simply put in an 8th note clock, and then the flip-flops will give me the downbeat quarter note kick in a typical house or techno pattern, and the offbeat. So it's like the quarter note shifted. So you get that shift between the two beats going. And I like having this idea of you could take one of them out and it will be like a divide 2, like a mathematical or musical division, depending on which one you patch out of. But then having this opposing thing for moving stereo. I really like flip-flopping irregular or Euclidean rhythms, just non-standard clocks as well.
Yeah, and he does have the out and the not, or the inverted out as well, both here. So you can go ahead and have something on the offbeat or the onbeat of the division. So it is a very flexible module.
It patches down.
I like it in that regard.
The out patches down to the in of the next flip-flop as well, if I remember correctly.
You are correct. So sometimes one of the percussion modules I'm going to be installing is particularly strong at really long, spread out, slow motion explosion sounds. So sometimes I'll take my downbeat clock and run it through here to happen on every, say, 4th measure, just to make sure I've got a big space in between things.
Yeah. Interesting question. Could you patch the Logic Ogic to create an XOR, an exclusive OR? So for people maybe wondering about logic, Boolean logic would state that an OR logic gate will provide, if either of the inputs is active, it will be active at the output, and if both of them are active, it will be output at the same time. An XOR, an exclusive OR gate, is one or the other. So if you had two different patterns coming in, you would only get an output when only one of them is active, not when both and not when nothing is active. Could we patch this to get an XOR?
You know, I've done that exercise and I forget the details of it now, but having the inverter in here, I believe, made that possible.
I'm just trying to think it through as well. I can't process it.
Yeah. Now, my mind is not in the space to sit down and do it right now. I'd have to put a truth table up. I can't visualize it right this second.
A spreadsheet of truth tables would be the one.
But I tell you, inverters are all too rare in logic modules. I don't know why so few of them have them. And I find them very essential. And the chain I'm about to finish building out will explain why here in a second. So quite often, these modules are putting out either very, very short pulses of only a few milliseconds. Tip on grids, by the way, it has an option whether or not to put out a 1 millisecond pulse or a longer pulse. There are some percussion modules, particularly digital sample-based ones, that will occasionally miss triggers if they're under a millisecond long. So if you're running grids in its standard setup, you may have, say, a sample player that's missing some beats from grids. Change it to the optional duration to make sure it always triggers your other devices. That's been one tip. But anyway, it's a fixed duration. VPMEs, Euclidean circles, you can play with the duration, but it's the same for every beat. You can play with Pamela. But sometimes I need to really change what the duration of those beats are, particularly if I'm doing stuff like closed hi-hat patterns versus open hi-hat patterns, etc. So another module I found to be really, really useful is a trigger to gate converter. I have the little Pico version of it here. Come on, camera, you can focus. My hand's right here. Oh, well, I'll pull back a little bit. So it does a couple things. There we go. It takes a trigger in, outputs a gate set by either the control that you set for length up here, or also the CV for length of it as well. And it has a probability control, which changes how long that gate is. So if you want to change how long, for example, an open hi-hat pattern is before then goes low and remutes a sound, etc. So this has been a really fun module for me to take something like, say, the accent output from grids, which is just a very tiny pulse, and then dial up the timing of it to make it, say, do a very long open hi-hat sound, then play around with probability to just go ahead and have a little bit of fun with just how long is that hi-hat held open to give some variation from beat to beat, even though the leading edge is right.
Yeah.
And there are a few modules that do this. Mainly, if you find a trigger delay module, they tend to also have a length for the gate going out. But this was a little 3 HP module that's dedicated to it. And this is never leaving the case. This has been an essential part of what I do.
Yeah. Kevin Ewing asked, any suggestions for a replacement for MI branches? Said that he killed his yesterday and we seem to be in that zone of the case. Very much so in that zone of the case. Maybe the Laddick probability skipper we've just mentioned.
I really like the Laddick.
But while we're on the theme of gates and triggers, the G&T from After Later Audio is a nice new 2 HP module that will take in a gate and then give you triggers, and then you can control gate length and also put a trigger in and give you a gate output. So it seems like a nice dual channel version of this kind of thing.
That's good to know, because the Pico T to G has been discontinued.
Yeah.
You can find them used or maybe left over in a dealer's inventory. I'm glad to hear there's another solution available.
Yeah, so just the web page isn't on screen, but it does say take a gate signal and give a trigger output on both the rise and fall of that gate. And then you can take a trigger signal, start the gate from that, and the gate length controls its gate length, and the fall output will generate a trigger at the end of that gate. So you also get a kind of end of output as well as the actual gate you've generated. So nice.
That could come in handy for muting hat type sounds.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I'll tell you, a problem that I have that I had to solve by having an inverter in this is, well, I'll ask you, you're a drummer, Ben. Do you consider an open hi-hat or a closed hi-hat to be the accent note?
The open would be the accent, in my mind.
That's the way I think too.
It's a louder, longer sound. when struck with the same.
But a lot of simple modules have a mute input that when you send it a gate, it closes the hat rather than opens the hat, which seems to be the opposite. Like if you're using the accent out from grids and you wanted the accent to give you an open hat, if you patched it straight to the mute, it would have the opposite effect of closing it. So that's why I'm really happy to have an inverter in this case to say, take the accent, invert it, so the signal is low when the accent comes out, high when there's not an accent, set the gate duration, and now the accent from grids, inverted, can be an open hat sound, and then we'll mute the hi-hat after the length is expired. So that's a little chain I use quite often to set up my hi-hats in this.
Which drum module is responding like that? So you mean patching an accent in, because an accent is what I would think is an entirely different thing to whether it's a closed or an open hat anyway. Cause
yeah, there's jumping ahead a little bit. For example, both the Chimera and the Crucible have choke jacks on them.
Yeah. So choke, I would expect to choke the sound and make it sound like a closed.
Exactly. So it's not like an accent input on some modules, like the tip top. I have a few modules like the WMDs that have the opposite. They have a choke input, and I need to send it basically an inverted gate to get the desired effect.
Okay, I see what you mean. You're repurposing that choke like an accent would be on a more kind of 909 type module. I've got what you mean now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do they not have accents as well? An accent and a choke?
Nope.
We'll come to those shortly anyway. Let's not jump too far ahead.
Yeah, we'll come to them anyway. I mean, they've got some cool stuff, but no. There is a so-called velocity on Plonk, but that's just to a VCA.
Yeah, fully variable as opposed to accent and normal.
So I have all these modules to give me different patterns, drop out or thin out the density of patterns, to give me logical combinations of the patterns, to go ahead and set lengths or probabilities of lengths. But every now and then you want to do stuff hands-on. And for that, I have a DivKid mutes module in this case.
Ta-da!
Yeah. Come on, camera. There we go. 4 switches, nicely damped, that I use for a variety of purposes. And one thing I do quite often is I'll set up a really busy hi-hat pattern, even 16th notes on Euclidean circles, and then I'll ride the temporary side of this, decide which clocks to let get through. The nice thing about the mutes module for people who don't have it is that the switches go 2 directions. Going to the right keeps it on all the time. So if I go this direction, it always leaves the signal on and through. But if I want to do something temporary, like ride a hat, the equivalent of riding kind of a mute on a mixer, going the other direction is just a temporary signal. So I'll say through, let go. Let some through, let go. Let some through, let go. And I'll do that quite often just to blip things through, depending on feel and listening to what other musicians are doing to fill in gaps in between what they're doing. So I've got the top part I use quite often for that effect. I've got the bottom part that I use to alter some audio wiring in my case. I'll show that in a few minutes as well.
Yeah, those switches Bafako use, which are on their hex mix, really lovely and playable. So they're great for just, as you say, just pinging them in. I'm going to pull this up again because Monstrous Machine laughed at it. The modules page on my website has the DivKid Wildebeest on there. That's the only reason I put that up there. Not to promote my own modules, just to show a bit of daft Photoshop work. Yeah.
I enjoy your Photoshop work, actually.
It did come up as well. Someone mentioned a waiting list for Oct. In case anyone's curious, I specifically mentioned I'm not sure about the waiting list, but Oct, there's a good amount going out every week at present, from Instruo to distribution to shops. So shops manage their own pre-order and wait list. That's nothing to do with distribution or us. But there's Oct stock going out every week, and a good chunk every week as well. Instruo very busy for anyone that's waiting and curious. I'm
waiting on one.
Yeah, yours might even be in the States now.
Oh wow, good. He didn't. I look forward to playing with that. I really do.
Yeah.
Some of the things we've touched on in the Monster Cast, etc. I really want to explore more in demonstrating more patch type stuff. Anyway, that's the rhythm pattern generation section of my case. I thought before I started going on then to the sound generation portion, I'm going to see if there's any lingering questions about the different pattern generators that I have and the ways that I'm combining them before we just ram onwards, because we have so many modules to get through.
Yeah, time flies. Oct, stock, and 2 smoking barrels instead of lock, stock. I like that. That's good. That's another bit of bad Photoshop work. An Oct module and a DivKid face. I'll have to think about that one.
And shotgun.
Yeah, and the smoking shotgun. Yeah, we've no lingering questions.
Okay, good. Let's have fun with some sound generation.
Yep.
So the idea of this case, and I've got Ben's mutes in here and famous Ben dangly mode because I need to get to the power connector behind it.
Trademark.
Is I want to have a variety of different sounds out of this case. I'm not trying to recreate like an 808 drum machine or a CR76 or whatever in my case. I want to have a variety of sounds so I can be a chameleon and change what I sound like depending on the song or what's appropriate for what we're doing. So I've purposely chosen a selection of sound modules that not only make sounds that I like, but purposely are very different, have different synthesis algorithms in each of them, just to have that variety of sounds. And the first thing is a good old-fashioned sample player. And I happen to use a Disting for that. I'm using a Disting Mark IV in the, I believe it's the I8 mode, which is 2 trigger ends. Let's go ahead and switch to the other camera so you can see things in more close-up. So in that particular, it allows me to call up different samples for the A and B outputs. XY inputs are the triggers, and I can retune one of them using the lower encoder inside this. So when I need to put in just extra sampled sounds, or maybe some kicks or ethnic kicks I've created, or I have a lot of sound effects like pneumatic pumps, nail guns, other really heavy industrial sounds I want to use for effects, I'll just use good old-fashioned sample playback. I will say that the older Disting, the Mark IV, is not the fastest in the world to respond to a trigger, and there is a little bit of jitter. The brand new Disting Dex, Disting EX, is extremely fast, like a millisecond or under, and very rock solid in responding to triggers. And I'm contemplating whether or not to try to jam a Dex in here instead of this, just to get tighter sample playback.
Yeah, Dex is really, really good.
He has some very nice modes in there too. We have all sorts of different samples and some fun randomization of different samples. There's a lot of cool things in Dex. I've got a Dex in the Monster, and I have 2 Disting 4s in this case doing different sample playback functions, and I have to decide whether or not I want to combine them into one module or not. We'll see.
Just what?
I'm just going to tack these down.
Yeah, we screw that in. Ed Random mentioned my modules are in a rising line. I'm not quite sure what that meant.
My modules are in a rising line?
I think they meant the module page on my site.
Huh, okay.
So it's on screen.
Oh, they must be just
maybe the alignment looks
funny
or something like that. Or
maybe if you shrink the screen to a different width, it might start going a little funny.
Yeah, it looks okay here. But yeah, if someone goes on the site and it looks strange, certainly ping me a message somewhere. I'll figure that out.
Got to check stuff on phones and tablets these days, I tell you.
Yeah, the Steve that looks after my website and does a very good job has done that. So I'm sure, I'm confident it's right everywhere. But we'll see.
So next to sample playback, I have an analog percussion engine. The SSF, Steady State Fate Entity. Come on, camera, you can focus. I know you can. You've done it before. Oh, well. He has 2 Entity percussion synthesizers out there. One is a bass, drum, and synthesizer voice, and one is the percussion synthesizer. The bass one is more tuned for low frequencies, but it has an attack and decay envelopes, so you can use it for a bass synth voice as well. I actually use the percussion module because it has a built-in noise source. And I find that gives me some additional flexibility with my percussive sounds. I use this as my kick most often because I just love the range of sounds that it has. The really deep things you can do with modulation and overdrive. But I'll also play around with a noise section, particularly with random voltages to the noise decay, just to add this layered hi-hat hit or snare hit doubled up with my kicks that I do with this. So this is this is my kick module. Love it. Everyone has different tastes and kicks. This is what does it for me.
I really like the Entity bass drum. And Cat Scan Meow has just said in the live chat that the bass is discontinued and is going to remake it to be even kick heavier, which is a really good idea.
Yeah, the overdrive on the bass versus the harmonics on the percussion synth. This is a personal taste thing. I prefer the sound of the harmonics on
that one.
On the percussion synth. That's another taste thing. Yeah. Another thing I want to point out is I am using the Constant Labs second version of their filtered bus boards in this case. And one of the features of those is that there's a set of 6 connectors that get additional filtering, all these extra electrolytic caps here. So I've made a point of arranging the bus boards in my case so that my effects, which carry a lot of analog stuff, is down by one end. And also, some of my percussion sound modules, which I'm definitely using for their audio outputs as opposed to generating triggers, are also by these extra filtered connectors. One complaint I will say about the SSF Entity is there are settings where it can be noisy if you leave the envelope open after the pitch envelope's gone subsonic. So I'm going to see if putting it on these more heavily filtered bus connections quieted down a little bit. But otherwise, yeah, I like that guy. I'll leave it loose. Maybe I can screw that in. I think I'm going to have enough room behind it. I hate to paint myself into a corner where I screw down a module, and now the power connector I want to get to is behind it.
Is there only me that's marked my wrist by going in between modules I've screwed in rather than unscrewing them? Just stupidly kind of, right, I am going to go, and you're trapped between a module.
Yeah, I can just about get my hand into a 6 HP hole, but it becomes a little bit of a monkey trap.
Not just me then.
Yeah.
You've at least tried it once.
8 HP is much easier to get my hand in, but yeah. And it's been commented as well that it's easier to connect the ribbon cable to the bus board first before you put the module in, then bring it out and connect it to the module. But I do it this way because in some cases I've pre-selected cables for their length, but also to make sure I don't plug in a cable backwards on the fly.
Yeah.
Not that I've ever done that before.
Yeah.
All too often, actually. So, sample playback, analog voice. One of the modules I really like is a physical modeling-based one, the IntelliGel Plonk. It's really good at doing metallics, like cymbals and things like that. But it also can do plucked string type stuff, even like guitar sounds and things like that. I happen to like a lot of struck metallics in my own music. That's my personal taste. So I love the range of sounds in here. What made me love Plonk even more was not being tied to its factory presets. I went through one day using their online editor, and I just marked up which patches do I like, which patches do I not like, and started overwriting and rearranging them. So I just had the patches I like in a row, and I tweaked every one hand by hand just to get something off the factory settings that was more to my liking. There's these 2 modulation controls, the X and Y, that you can set what parameters they modulate and what their range are. So I just spent a day going through every preset in here, changing the range, changing what they affected to be what I liked, so I can just grab in live performance, know every preset I pull up, I've already customized it to be a useful range for the entire range of that knob. And it took a day to go through that patch organization, but boy, was it worth it. Because now every time I go to this module, I know every preset is something I like with ranges that I like.
Yeah, absolutely worth it. It's things like the VCMC from Bafako or the Cumming CV Thing, the smaller module. They can be, truth be told, a little fiddly in setup sometimes, but the fact you have to do it once, and then all the integration that they give specifically to how you want to use it with other devices, or just use Plonk here with a range that works. It's a really nice thing when you know you can turn that knob live and there's not a dead zone or just a zone you don't like, too loud, too quiet, too bright, too long, too short. Just to have that freedom, and then the freedom of the modulation externally as well, because I presume that then operates within the ranges that you've set as well.
Yeah, the ranges, he does have attenuators on the input, which I love. So that's another nice thing Daniel's done. But also for the knobs, there's one song I did on the Data Cult Audio thing we're talking about this weekend, where I played with the inharmonicity of a cymbal, where I know one extreme is with a very clean sound, and the other extreme is a dirty sound 1 octave down. And it makes it so easy live just to go one extreme, other extreme,
Yeah.
one extreme, other extreme, and know it's going to be on pitch. Otherwise, if I'm in the middle, it can be a little off pitch and doesn't blend well with the other sounds. So yeah, that was important for me. Next up, I did not think I'd like this module initially, and I avoided getting it because although I like metallics, I don't necessarily like harsh metallics. And the Chimera is an interesting granular synthesis-based metallic sound module, kind of for doing snare-like sounds and things like that. But I found it does really cool explosions.
Yeah.
I'd use it for very long envelope, really settled out sounds. And then I'll run random modulation or very complex modulation from, say, the Chaos Devices Zadar to it. So I get these explosions that just evolve and have interesting things happen as the tail goes out on them. So Chimera has become a favorite slow tempo, once every 2 or 4 measures accent module for me. And it does have a bit crusher and a sample rate reducer. I use the comb filter quite often in the effects section. And then go ahead and have a slowly random voltage, change the comb filter around so the character of the sound changes over time. And yeah, very specialized, but it's become a part of my sound more or less. I'm very happy to have that.
Yeah, let me pull the website up again. Just get that on screen. The feel is the big thing on there for me with Chimera, just how dynamic it can be in that you can have triggers. There is an accent and a choke on this one. I'm not sure about the other one you have. That's what threw me earlier. You can trigger it, accent it, and choke out the sound. But then you can also have the triggers respond with a feel where they're all even, or the first in every 4 is accented, and when you trigger it with non-steady clocks, so some kind of rhythmic pattern, a Euclidean pattern, or irregular or random rhythms, different notes. It's not quite an accent when you combine the feel change and the accent change together. It's really nice and dynamic.
Yeah, the accent's nice, and also Surface chooses what set of samples that it uses when it's playing back. And I'll also play around with sample and hold through like your random step module or step random module, or slowly varying to Surface, just so each successive hit is in a slightly different set of samples. Therefore, it's like hitting a different part of the metal object.
Yeah. If you want a hard-hitting analog kick, their Creator module, that's WMD's Creator, is great. Production Star says. I've not tried it. I don't know. I know Creator. I can pull that one up on screen, but I haven't tried it. Have you had a chance to try Creator, Chris?
I have not. There's a person in our local modular meetup who tends to get all of WMD's percussion modules.
Yeah.
And he has a Creator, but coronavirus hit, so I've not had a chance to go ahead and meet up with him and play with Creator. I know it's going to have a useful range of sounds.
Yeah.
I've gotten so used to having the noise built into Entity that I'd have to change my thinking to layer another kick module with noise to get the sounds I'm used to. And I've got that, and we'll get to that section here in a second. But I do want to try Creator out because I like the sound of their modules.
Yeah.
The next one in the lineup is another WMD and another synthesis technique, their Crucible module, their cymbal, hi-hat, struck metal module. And it actually uses a form of waveguide synthesis inside of it to create its sounds. And interesting story, heard this premiered at Synthplex a while back, played with it very loudly on the show floor, and I kept pushing it to its extremes, and I just couldn't get to these really dank, distorted, misshapen metal sounds that I like. It was too good. It was too clean. It was too realistic. And I kept saying, look, I really wish I could just push it outside. And I said, but then it wouldn't be realistic. And I'm like, yes, that's the point. I don't want to always have a realistic hi-hat, although it does those very well. Yeah. I want the ability to make it really sick. And then apparently I wasn't the only one. And a few weeks later, they had changed the bottom of the 3 algorithms to be really sick. And the guy who was creating it was initially objected, but you can even hear the echoes on the waveguide. That's what they want. And And now I just love this sucker. So in addition to being really nice hi-hats and having things like separate trigger inputs for edge, mid, or you hit them two together, they're the bell of the cymbal, having a choke input that we just talked about, in addition to CV over all the other parameters, I can get this constantly evolving set of sounds. So quite often I'll do things like plug one channel of grids into, say, the mid input, and then Euclidean circles, the probability skipper, to the edge input. So it'll start off with I just have a pattern hitting, the mid part of the cymbal, but then through the probability skipper, start bringing in just random edge hits as well. One of my favorite techniques with this module. And I've got a video showing how to take advantage of those extra inputs.
I will get that link. While you're getting that one in there, maybe a little bit of a big question to ask, and we'll be coming to this, and certainly in the third episode of this kind of mini-series, we'll be looking at examples. I'll definitely be looking at this.
Yes.
DJP asked, do you layer percussion, and could you explain a little bit of how you work with percussion? That's a stream on its own.
Yeah. One. And, I have to say, Ben, I was really inspired by your talk about layering sounds time-wise rather than just stacking them.
Yeah.
And that's triggered a whole line of thought I'm probably going to be writing on in the future. I tend not to layer the sounds in this. I will tend instead to use counterpoint with different sounds. For example, something I really like are double kicks with two different samples, and I'll tune them left and right. So I might have a sample tuned one direction, and then the analog kick tuned another direction, and have fun hitting them with alternating beats, maybe even the kick and snare from grids, and have that counterpoint between them rather than layering sounds on top of each other. That's a personal taste thing. I mean, if I went to another kick module, I could start layering the noise section, which I'm going to add last, on top of that to get that particular splashy accent that I like to getting out of the percussion module. How about you, Ben? Do you tend to layer? Well, I guess you've already told us you like to layer together your different modules to really shape the percussion, a transient, the body, the tail.
Yeah, I mean, the first ever commercial sample pack I made was hundreds of kick drums and other one-shot drum sounds, so I certainly got a fast track through synthesizing and sampling drum sounds. And that pack actually had a tops, bodies and subs, or tails maybe was the wording, so you could go in and very easily pick a top, a mid, body kind of sound and a sub, and kind of custom craft your own very easily out of parts that I'm sure there were some bad combinations in there. Top 37, body 12 and tail 1 might not have gone together that well, but generally it felt like they were the kind of perfect combo of franking drum sounds, if you like, to pull together. But I like to layer, thinking of what I'm getting from it. In a production sense, if it's as simple as, it's not very modular, but skipping through maybe a pack of drum sounds and going, all right, the tail in that is good. I will filter things out of that and keep it the tail. I'm trying to be very objective in what I'm doing. There might be that perfect smack at the start of a sound, but I know it's going to be an issue for the other sound, so I'll chop it off, or I'll filter it, maybe phase invert it, maybe even add a crossfade on the front of it, so I lose the attack or chop the attack off and have a sound come in, ever so slightly later on the grid. It's about placing them, as you say, for me, in time, as opposed to just more and more sound on top of each other. If we were thinking of longer sounds, maybe like a bass note, I might just simply want a short percussive sound and then a fading sound. So I get that sforzando, which would be a brass or wind technique, that kind of loud that comes right down and then fades back up again. You can do that really simply with 2 envelopes and 2 VCAs. One that's a quick short decay and one that's a rising attack. That tends to be how I layer in modular. I don't feel I've the tools to layer and stack how I would, as I say, making, say, commercial sample bank in the modular. I don't have enough filtering, chopping, crossfading. I can't quite get in on that kind of micro level that I'm used to. So I don't tend to just outright layer sounds. I'm setting them off of each other. Gate delays or VCAs to make kind of front ends fade in a little bit. But yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because on the one hand, I like to create sounds that you can focus on, and that's a very interesting sound to hear its life. but I tend to play quite often with other musicians rather than solo, and I'm just the drummer behind them. And I found that if I make very detailed sounds that you're supposed to listen to, it may get buried in what all the other musicians are doing. So that's why I work a lot more on counterpoint and leaving holes, actually. But the conversation about how you do layering has got my mind going on a couple things. One is one of the earliest sample libraries available was something called Trails and Reflections, where they took 100% wet from a variety of things like a classic, concrete chamber acoustic reverb, a plate, other famous digital reverbs, and they just did samples of snare, kick, tom, blah, 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 but just 100% wet out of those reverbs. And I have all those samples loaded in my disting, so I could start blending that with some of the other sharp attack stuff to create the tail. Same thing with Chimera. I like this really drawn out explosion sound. I could certainly do something where I'm doing a sharp transient sound with another module and layer that with Chimera. So that's something I might start experimenting with. And I have to say something I've been stocking up on are different form cables so I can send triggers to multiple places at the same time. And that's where that'll come in handy. And that may be a case where the trigger to gate 2 with the different links. Maybe I should have had a trigger delay in here instead to do that. So yeah, some things to think about and to try out.
It's also a stylistic thing, as a drummer and being in a band, playing guitar in bands, or I've played with really good drummers as well. When they put, say, the kick drum under the snare as a way of layering an emphasis in a beat that doesn't have it, like we know that house is pounding, it's on 4 to the floor.
Yeah.
For a certain part or section of a song, for some of the snares to just have a kick underneath can be a huge impact. Or take dub or reggae where the rim shot or the cross stick has that kick on it, but they're timed slightly off. I spoke of a great producer, Pash, he calls himself, over towards Manchester. Paul Hutchinson, I'll have to see if I can find a link. And he talks about recording acoustic drums for dub and reggae, and that you want that cross stick to hit first before the kick. And there's been sessions where it hasn't, and he's so kind of dedicated to the root and core of this groove and style of music, he will go in and micro edit all that stuff just to be like, I'm going to get this right. And it makes a huge difference, the timing of these things and how they land and fit and feel. But with you can do that in a modular with a gate delay. You may have to gate delay the step before the one you want to push up against where it should be, but slightly back, because you can't pull backing time and time travel. So that's something that I think I first got into that with the Moleko Variegate, where if I want beat 2, the 5th 16th note to be early, maybe a clack just before a snare, you end up having to put it on the 4th one and push the delay out so it's almost on the next beat. It's a slightly odd way of thinking it, because as a player I've always thought, I'm pulling this early, and that's creating this emphasis and this kind of rhythmic push. To actually think of it as being a beat early, it's really strange as a drummer, but it's not too complicated in practice.
I agree completely, though, with that, and that's been a frustration of mine. I used to be involved in product development back in the 80s and 90s, and I was really pushing for rhythmic sequence stuff that said, look, we know ahead of time what's going to happen in the sequence. We need that flexibility to pull stuff forward, even for just reverse sounds, to make sure that the impact at the end of the reverse hit on the beat. Let's back time the sample.
Yeah.
But another part of that, which is important, I'm really into psychoacoustics. There's a timing range, sometimes called precedence effect. Haas effect is a subset of that, where if you separate sounds by a certain amount, you hear them as 2 distinct sounds. But if they're so close together, the brain will merge them into one sound, but it's not the same sound. It'll have a different timbre depending on where the timing relationship is between those 2 sounds. And that's not explored enough. Having that little bit of micro delay of another sound just to change the timbre of the attack transient of a sound.
That's exactly it with the layering for me, but that's a DAW and stacks of audio that I can go in and cut. A nice simple tool for that in Logic. You could do it in Ableton with a delay. They have a sample delay which is based on samples of the sampling rate as opposed to tempo based division, and you can just offset the sides slightly or just offset everything slightly. I know you get track delays in Ableton Live as well. You could have 2 tracks against each other and push or pull the whole thing. Yeah. And it's phase difference, it's the effect, as you're saying. It's a huge thing to explore. We do have a question that just goes back earlier. Liquids Acoustics mentions they've joined the stream late. That's okay. It'll be there to watch back later for anyone that's joined us later on. Says Chris made an excellent video on the S090 or S90, the Ladic probability skipper.
Yeah.
But their question is, does it work on gates as well as triggers?
I honestly forget. It is a gate in, so yes. It maintains the duration of the gate going through it. It just decides whether or not to let it go through.
Yeah.
So it does maintain the duration. I'm pretty sure.
I will put, someone can find it because we're live, we're doing this live.
Yeah.
I put the link to the module, the dual probability skipper, in the live chat if someone wants to find out and come back.
Yeah, as you say, there is a problem with trying to pull stuff earlier in time, but I do believe there's a little bit to be explored with really minute changes with delayed envelopes, but in a very tiny range, or even a delay, audio delay with a very, very tiny delay dialed in. Or you were pointing out earlier, there was an alternate probability skipper that put out a trigger on the fall, not just the rise. That's where you play around the duration to basically give you that delayed gate. We're going to be talking about probably very small ranges of knobs to get that less than 15 millisecond precedence effect, Haas effect sort of blending. But I do think that's a worthwhile area to explore. And again, if you can randomize it a little bit, just so every hit sounds different. Because what I don't like about a lot of music in general, drum machine music in particular, but even modular music, is when every hit is exactly the same. There's something to be said for that sort of transform and that mechanical feel, but I keep trying to find ways of getting a human feel into modular, how to create that every one of those hits is a little bit different, because that's the way it is on a drum head or a cymbal, etc.
Yeah. Part of the reason random step exists, this idea of humanizing. If you have something like a gate delay, you can play with the timing, you can play with the tone, you can play with the transient attack on some of these modules, shaving at just slight bits of added attack time. And to do that, you need lots of unique random, as opposed to just one random that collectively shifts the whole system. Everything needs to be like micro varied. The MIDI humanize function in Logic is one I've really kind of exploited a lot over the, just select all, humanize, just keep hitting it, and then I'll go back and rework it, because it's as random would be in a modular system. It's not an intelligent way of humanizing. It doesn't go, oh, we're playing a 3/4 jazz groove and the ride needs to push further forward than the bass drum to add a bit of extra push to the rhythm against the piano player. It doesn't intelligently know that, so you may have to go back in and adjust. But yeah, that's part of the reason random step existed, this idea of humanizing everything. The EO Wave Swing has just come up. That's a gate delay I didn't know of. I've just put in the chat.
Oh, I did not know that. I have to look at that.
The Moleko gate delay is a nice one, which I'll put the link in the chat as well. And good point for a couple of questions as well. Let me just scroll back up.
Yeah. You've also got me thinking now things to do with random step, because at first I thought, well, I definitely want an attenuator going into parameters of different modules, but I thought, what if I took random step, put it through a VCA as my attenuator, and then used another line from my sequencer like velocity out to decide which notes had a wider range of random value as opposed to other ones that were kept tight. That's something I'm going to play with now that you've brought it up.
That's a really interesting place to be in, that you're very definitively letting, say, the sixth note in the bar have more random than the others, but that doesn't mean it's more in terms of like positive change. It doesn't mean it's a higher random voltage. It's just a larger chance or larger range of potential change. And you're kind of stacking these layers of probability and chance that way. And that's, I really like that you're doing that with the skipper on, say, Euclidean rhythms as well. It's not just, I'll put my clock in and let this carve out some probability. It's, I give you a defined rhythm and you will carve into my rhythm. So it's not really random. They will only still fire on the rhythms that you put in. And that's a really nice musical space to be with any kind of probability function, I find.
Yeah, I really want my randomness to refer back to something that's logical and makes sense. When it's all random, I will lose interest. But if there's a structure underneath, but I've knocked holes in it, I personally find that more interesting to look to.
Yeah. A couple of questions just to kind of fly through. Gerald Ford says, adding the 500 series Elijah envelope transient design has been a huge addition to getting the drum sounds he wants, with nice crackly, dirty transients and tails. Yeah, transient designers and that Eliza or Alicia modules look great. I've used their master compressor plugin, which is fantastic. You can, to a large amount in Modular, shape your sounds. If you can add another VCA stage, an envelope follower, another envelope that will fire afterwards. So if you have a drum sound into a VCA, I know this is a trick you like to do with low-pass gates, Chris. We'll have a quite rich, complex tone from a drum module into a low-pass gate and also strike the low-pass gate at the same time as the drum. So you've got another stage of volume and tone control. You can be more dynamic, really get in and carve into it. We mentioned, I think, in the previous stream, Philip Mees from Rabid Elephant with their Portal kick drum. We got into a huge conversation at Super Booth about how they're trying to model compressor responses in the envelope, in the synthesis of the kick drum, because they're like, we know this is going to be aimed at these styles of music. You tend to compress in this kind of way. You get past the knee in the compressor and it slams down with the attack time. They're trying to get that into the curves of their shapes. And it sounded great. I'm really looking forward to hearing Portal for that one.
Yeah, we're talking about kick modules. Portal is something I've been kind of waiting on. I saw it at Super Booth last year, and he said afterwards, we decided to redesign it. Build up my hopes and dash them, will you?
Nemborg in the chat, did I play drums before Eurorack? Yeah, a good 10 plus years of drums. I was probably teaching drums for 10 years. I was teaching, really quick for anyone curious, it's super off topic, but drums and guitar were my instruments. I taught those privately for quite some time, as well as music production and music theory. Got into bits of sound design and sample design, commercially released music for media libraries and TV. And until about a year ago, I was teaching in a couple of schools, music lessons, and a college part-time lecturer for music and music tech. So that's whistle tour of my kind of background of that. I was fortunate to have a really good music education. I know some people say you don't need to go to a music school, but I would recommend it. But that's another
It helps. And that is a weakness of mine, is I did not have that background, but I try to pick up bits of it, and it's a continuous education thing for me.
Well, it was time for me. The degree that I got me that I couldn't have taught in a college without a degree or taught in a school without a degree. But it was those 4 years to do nothing but that. I stopped working. I'd worked since being 15, and I was like, this is all I'm going to do. And managed to be fair, I was teaching part-time. That's how I managed to stay alive and buy food and things. But anyway, yes, I do play drums. Not so much anymore. I don't have room for a drum kit in the house. But yeah. Swing from Eowave we brought up. Brett Lemmings says pre-recorded show, right? This isn't pre-recorded, but it will be available straight away on YouTube. Maybe I think they've got rid of the processing time. I think live streams used to not disappear, but they'd take a while to come back. This will be live. And
I see the chat disappears for a while, but then the chat comes back.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
And the tip is to look at live chat, not top chat. Live chat has all the comments.
There we go. He's going to make it his mission to find a video of baby drumming Ben. I was 11 when I started playing drums, so there's no baby. I mean, I'm baby-faced now. If I had a shave, we could maybe remake it. but I was 11 when I started, so no baby drumming videos. Any other related questions before we move on?
I realize we're an hour and a half in and we've only done half the modules.
Yeah, let's blast through it. The dub engineer, Kieran, was Paul Hutchinson, Pash. I'll try and find a link. If I don't come back to you in the chat, Kieran, because, we're halfway through and well in time-wise, leave a comment on the video. I'll come back to it. Anyone see the dark cassette delay Euro module coming out of the end of the year? It's massive. That is the space... Is it the Space Case Echo, they call it? Again, I'll maybe try and find a link to that. Any thoughts on the rate or slew when designing random step? Yeah, slew was something that's really useful. It was a consideration, but for me that module is about getting lots of modulation. We've got ideas. There's nothing in the works currently, but some kind of slewed, random, or just slew would be a handy bank of slews. In fact, that was one of your suggestions, Chris, that if this develops into a line of modules, and as I say genuinely, that's not been worked on at present, but if it does, you said I'd really like a set of slews to add to random step.
Yeah.
And of course, attenuators as well for the modules that don't have them. How long's this?
I mean, in the meantime, take it and patch it through a low pass filter or a high pass filter actually, and tune down the cutoff way low to go ahead and slew it a little bit, and add resonance then to give it a little bit of a wobble.
Yeah, it's a really nice trick. I think you're the first person to bring that to light. I think that for me, at least.
It was an old Electronotes thing from way back when, resonant envelopes, and I've been kind of reviving it.
Yeah, get a wobble on your envelopes. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Marble's jitter function is good for micro timing. Yes, it is. The jitter that runs all the patterns on marbles is really good.
Yeah.
You can add swing in Pamela's new workout. The Clavis Quadergy has a pre-delay built into each. That's a really good idea for your envelopes. I didn't know that. What power's being used here is constant lab power. I will leave you, Mark 27, to watch the previous episode where we went through that.
Yep. Yeah, the very beginning of that, we got into it.
And nice timing divisions on the squat pyramid. CV controlled swing and gate on the Moffensief Mito. It's a shame that they're getting out of it. All the Moffensief modules and the company will cease to exist. They've been very vocal in a very Ross way of telling you, buy this stuff because it's going and then it's gone. I still can't.
They had an audio delay with various micro adjustments that I thought would be cool for Kerplus strong patches, but now that might be another way of doing some of this micro timing stuff. I might have to pick one up before they disappear.
Okay, let's keep going. I'll scan through as you carry on.
Almost done with the percussion row, and then we can get on to some other stuff. I'll go ahead and switch my video camera back. So, in this row of modules, I do have sample playback, analog, sound modeling, granular, waveguide, but I need to have a throwback to the 70s and modular percussion, so I have to have a noise module in here. I've been through a few different noise modules, and the one that I've kind of settled on, and I wish it was more available, was the ARC Noise Rainbow. ARC are people who tend to do surge type stuff, but they do a few really cool Eurorack modules. Come on, camera, behave today. The Noise Rainbow has a white out, a gray out, and a continuously adjustable color output. And it also has a digital noise section to get really rough stuff from the clock tuned way down to tuned up. And it does have a clock input, so you can envelope the clock rate for the digital noise out. So it's a really, really versatile noise source inside 3 HP. Rare as hen's teeth, as they say. I'd love to see them do another run of these. And sitting next to that, just to save a little bit of time, is a low-pass gate. I've been through a few low-pass gates. I'm going to try putting the Make Noise LXD back in here, particularly patched into the nicely filtered section of the bus board, see if I can get it quiet. It does have a little bit of issue of a little bit of leakage. The Vactorals have been hit quite a lot. But it's just a lovely sounding noise gate and really easy to use live. So that finishes out my percussion section, classic noise splash stuff. And do a little bend dangling module trick here.
It was okay when you did it earlier because it was with mutes. I felt like you could leave it hanging for dear life if it's something I've been involved with.
But you're not willing to take responsibility for the life of other modules?
No. No, I don't are responsible for any Make Noise module damage. It's safe. I don't recommend doing it, but yeah, they've certainly been plenty of dangling module in my time.
You know, for people who want pristine panels, I'm probably necking them up a little bit. One thing I will say is in this case, I do leave 1 HP of space on the right side of the case. That helps ventilate when you have a bottom to top thing. But the main reason is I have a light that I clamp onto this part of the case to then arc over the case and illuminate the case. And I need a little bit of extra room on the right side of the case where the clamp goes for the light. So that's why I leave a 1 HP gap on that end of the case. And I'll screw in the modules later. We're running late, so I'm going to pick up pace here a little bit.
Okay.
And start looking at a new section of the case. So in this section is where I have a lot of additional modulation. because it's very important to me to have CVs that are constantly changing and perhaps changing in time with the beats. So that's why one of the main modules down in this section is a version of the Modular Instruments marbles. And I happen to be using the, my name, Modulex. What's the name of this? Codex Modulex. I keep forgetting the name of the company. Kara. I love the layout of Kara because it puts the trigger side right across from the CV side, lined up, so it's very easy to see the relationship. All the jacks are on the bottom, making it easy to patch. I'll occasionally use this for additional snare kick type of patterns, particularly to hit other samples, vocal drops, etc. But I also like it for these timed random CVs that I then will use to change parameters of other modules.
Yeah. I'm just putting some links in the chat to the Noise Rainbow from Arc that you mentioned, which is before the LXD. Everyone
email them and harass them into doing another run of that module. Because it's a worthwhile module.
All with the opening line, Chris Meyer says.
Yeah. I won't harass folk tech into making more nano gardens. I think they got some emails after last episode.
Does the nice topical question, Warden Buffett, does the LXD respond well to envelopes or just triggers and gates?
Yes, you can ping it, or you can go ahead and send it a normal CV, an envelope as well.
Yeah.
So it's very flexible. Has two different sounds for the top and bottom, different filter cutoffs, different backdraw lengths. So it's instant patch, different sound. Very nice. Mm-hmm. An issue with the outputs from Marbles, the Kara version, and a little bit less so with Pamela, is having attenuverters to change their range. You can go ahead and go into the second page on Pamela with different presses and clicks to attenuate things, but that's a real pain in the ass to do live. So I have over in this section of the module a big old set of attenuators or CV offsets, and I pre-patch all of the outputs of the Y side, the CV side of Marbles, and 3 of my outputs from Pamela's into this levitate from erogenous tones. So I immediately have 7 jacks in this case, already with my bank of randomized voltages and attenuators right here already on them, including the ability to boost signals up to ×2. So that way I can just have a bank I can quickly patch into and adjust without looking for an attenuator, looking for, that module does not have an attenuator on it. This has been a really, really convenient live performance thing for me to have. This everything pre-patched to this.
Yep. Just to save a little bit of typing while you screw that in. We did have a question saying, can you use the LXD both channels at once? To which I responded yes. And a follow-up question of they mean both inputs. So there's 2 inputs, 2 control inputs for the opening the low-pass gates, either triggers or envelopes or other signals. Won't respond well to audio rates. There'll be a natural slewing at that kind of frequency from the Vactrals. And 2 outputs. You could chain them if you wanted a much steeper response. You could go input to 1, out of 1 into 2, and out of 2, and then strike them both at the same time.
And that's internally normaled to do that.
Okay, so saves a cable. If you wanted to chain the behaviors as well.
Okay. So I have pre-patched 7 of the 8 channels on the Levitate to be a lot of my CVs that I like to use. However, I find that I do occasionally need additional attenuators or bias voltages for other modules. I have 1 channel free on Levitate. We mentioned in the last episode that I've added noise engineering sync to ferrule, which gives me some more attenuators. But I found that I'd like to have more attenuators, basically another utility mixer, just to process my CVs. For the longest time, I had a Frap Tools 321 in here, which is my favorite of the utility mixers. I've done a long video on just what the Frap Tools 321 can do. But I wanted to free up some more space. So when I was on the Mutant Modular website looking at their fan synth, I said, well, what other modules do they have? And they have this very nice little attenuator called the AVT, which in 2 HP packs a lot of useful functions. The bottom, in and out, are just an attenuator, or actually an attenuverter, so you can invert the signal. The top is a separate attenuverter that can go negative ×1 or positive ×2. I love utility mixers that can go ×2 so I can boost signals. That's all 2 rare modules. And a voltage offset to that signal or that you can use as a straight voltage offset. So inside this little 2 HP module, I've got several utility mix functions. And they're really well chosen as to what they are. So this is a brand new module for me. I'm going to give it a try. I kicked out the 321 to make room for it. And some additional modules I'm going to be putting in here. And yeah, I'm pretty excited about trying out this new little thing. I think it's going to be just the ticket to get the little things I need. I think I'm going to get a shorter power cable for it too eventually here. They did find a way in a 2 HP module, though, to use all the pins of the connectors. One of my issues with 2 HP brand modules, they only use 1 row of connectors, and I've had connectors fall out before. This uses both rows.
Very nice.
So clever engineering on their part.
Yeah. They've been great. I've seen them for a couple of times at Modular Day Barcelona, which I would imagine current pandemic ongoing maybe won't happen this year. Who knows? I certainly don't know the situation well enough in Spain months in advance to judge either. But I'm hoping that can happen and we can all see each other soon. Lots of great stuff. I've put a link to some of their external utilities as well. They have a little passive mixer and some attenuators. They're on little kind of thumb dials. You can plug in, just plug your cables into, and they've been super handy too.
Yeah, this is where I'm gonna have too many cables behind here. So I'll probably go back after this episode and shorten up some of those runs just to neaten things up.
Yeah. You've got a 1 HP gap there. Is that intentional?
Yes, it is. I have a lot of cables running through here, splitting different clocks out that then get rerouted other places. I found that this area gets really tight. So here and also here next to Pamela, where I also have a lot of stuff coming out, I've left myself 1 HP gaps just to route cables because they get really bundled up in my backbone patch. And in the next episode, a week from today, I'm not only going to show patching voices, I'm going to show what I call the backbone patch, which is the underlying clocking, effect sends, pre-patch stuff that makes setup a gig so much easier for me. A bunch of right angle cables very tightly bundled together. A lot of people have seen my OCD approach to my cabling for this system, and yeah, it's the way it is, folks.
As if by magic, you answered Nemborg's question in the chat. Are we doing a patching video for the TARDIS? There you go. Exactly a week from today,
Yep.
same time, 8 p.m.
Yep.
UK. If you watch Learning Modular and DivKid pages, we'll be posting links around. I will post a link to the next show in the chat before we finish today as well.
Yeah. And the next section of the case, now that we're past modulation, is something I always had as part of my system when I played live in the past, was what I call the ambience section, where I have, before it used to be cassette tapes, then it was a dual CD player, and now it's a sample module and a granular module, a version of Clouds, the Monsoon, that I can load up with interesting backgrounds, found voices, other textures, and use those as ambience backdrops. In the case of Monsoon, not only can I use it to be a really fun scatterer of sounds that go through it, I'll also quite often use its freeze function on its buffer to load it up with things and then trigger what's in its buffer. And a favorite trick of mine is to trigger it from, say, the so-called snare or kick outputs from Marvel's Kara, but then vary the voltage to the position inside the buffer to maybe start always on the same word and then start opening up the width of position so I start triggering different words inside that buffer. And another thing that I use mutes for is I have the bottom switch in mutes pre-patched between my ambience sample playback and the input of Monsoon, so I can go ahead and feed it fresh material, mute it if I don't want it going through there. So that's another great thing that's come in handy for mutes.
We got a question in the chat. How wide is Kara? It's 10 HP. And there's a link to Modular Grid.
Yep.
There's also a 12 HP variant, Christian says.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few different variations. I looked at them to check out layout, size, etc., to get what I liked. And a Monsoon, I tried a cloudburst, a microburst. Too small, too cramped. I love Monsoon, taking the various shift functions and bringing them out on their own knobs down here, and having sliders with bicolor LEDs to show me CVs going to the main parameters. So yeah, Monsoon's my favorite of these smaller cloud variations. A little bit noisy, but, it's live. Guitarists are really noisy, so hey.
Subtle
I
mute.
worry about like a whisper of noise coming out of this case. I even have like a Rocktron hush for this case. And then guitars. Okay, never mind. Yeah.
Subtle mutes plug in the chat. Yeah, Chris is on a royalty every time he drops the word mute. He's not said oct enough to earn his keep tonight, though.
I'll work on it. Did I mention random stuff? But there's a bit of Darwinism inside this case, though. I mean, things go in because I think I need the function, and if they don't do it, they come out.
Yeah.
And mutes stayed in the case.
Well, we're on the topic of Monsoon. Have we tried the microcell?
No, I don't have room for it.
The supercell is the big one. Microcell is a similar size to your Monsoon, but with all the added things, it's a much more cramped interface.
Yeah, I have not. I've looked at it. I like the idea of the additional parameters. I'm scared of the density of the interface for live performance.
Production SAR. Sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, question. Production SAR. Seen someone on YouTube using clouds for a lo-fi tape delay style sound. Can't for the life of him get clouds to work that way. Apparently it's only available on an older Parasites firmware. There is the looping delay officially in clouds. I've not really messed around on Parasites firmwares for them, but the looping delay is where I would start personally.
I do happen to like the 8-bit 22K sample rate mode in clouds, just to create a purposely lo-fi echo of stuff. And we're going to talk a lot more about echo here in a bit. I like my echoes to sound different than the source, so you can distinguish them and it becomes another instrument. So I will purposely use lo-fi mode in Monsoon, not just to get the longer times, but so that it has its own character compared to the original sound that went through it.
Yeah.
Next to Monsoon is another Distinct Mark IV. This one's loaded up with all of my ambiances. And on this one, I'm using a different of the I algorithms. I'm using the one that has reversible playback. So you can play back the ambiances continuously, but I also have speed control. I can slow things down to a dead stop and start playing them backwards as well. And it's pretty good at filtering out the aliasing noise that happens when you slow things way down. So this is another way for me to mutate my ambiances, to have them go at different speeds, textures, really slow, or even take like all the foreign voices I have in here and run them backwards just to make them that less distinguishable to what they're doing. Jim Coker also recorded for me a bunch of really fun percussion sounds where he took some very resonant stones and rocks where he'd hit them and let them ring out. Well, then I'll play those backwards in here and get that reverse out of this thing. I like that effect as well.
There's a lot to be said for going out and recording just some basic found sound of your own. Capture some moving air, capture the noise, the ambience, the kind of crust and the bits that you wouldn't want in a kind of hi-fi sense, and having those kind of forced into, shorten the sound, work on the sound, add extra VCAs as you need.
Yeah, frankly, I need to do more of that.
I've been doing it while the builders have been here. I didn't get any pouring concrete sounds today. I should have done, but there's going to be a good building a new studio industrial sample pack by the time I'm finished.
This module needs a shorter cable on it too, so that's something I'm going to go back and do later on. It's really getting packed in here. But I'm just trying to jam ahead time-wise. There we go. So in addition to the sample playback of the disting up here and the extra disting down here, I also have a 1010 Music black box. I used to have a bit box inside the case. I kept trying to find more room. So I'll bring a black box into here with a lot of my loops. But an additional module I love to process the black box through is yet another filter. I have another filter just to be able to add more stuff to the voice from the bottom half, but also it's really fun just to go ahead and feed other sounds through a filter, vary the cutoff, particularly if it's very resonant, etc. And one of the filters I love to do that with is one based on the Niall Steiner design. Excuse me.
Excuse you.
The Steiner VCF has a unique character that it has inputs for each mode rather than outputs. So it has low pass, band pass, and high pass input. And then the frequency control basically acts as a crossover between those inputs. So I'll have fun putting two different patterns, low pass and high pass. Instead of just doing a slider crossfade, do a frequency-based crossfade between them. I've also found it very useful for live performance just to pre-patch a couple different top loops out of black box, say into bandpass and into low pass, and just have them there that I know I can go ahead and swoop something up or play around with a very resonant bandpass filter and really play with selecting different frequencies inside that pattern as a live performance element. There is a smaller version of this from Blue Lantern modules that I used to use. I think it was only 8 HP. But I saw this new version with this really nice large knob. I said, that's going to work really well for live performance. So I like to grab that knob and play with it in real time. I decided to mount it upside down in my case because I know a lot of my cables run along this bottom portion and it'll make it easier to plug into. And then it'll also mean that the knob is somewhat in free air rather than being against the wood here, maybe pinching my fingers as I try to use it.
Yeah. Rob Hardike has that multi-inputs to a multi-mode filter as opposed to multiple outputs as well. An example he likes to give is to use two drum machines where you have the kick from one and the hi-hat from the other, or the top part from the other. Of course, that's very broad speaking in practice. A lot of drum sounds are so broadband that they would cross over, but put one drum kit into the low pass, another into the high pass, and as you say, a frequency fade between them. It's an interesting way to
Another trick I'll do is I'll take like a very busy like drum and bass style pattern, slow it down to half speed, and play that into the low pass input, and then have the normal version of it in the high pass. So I can start with this really dirge-like version of it, and then fade up to the very busy version of it.
That's really interesting. That sounds like some kind of odd spectral morph I'd have spent ages trying to do on a computer.
Yeah, I have a Steiner filter in the Monster as well, just because I like to be able to do that sort of spectral shifting of sounds.
Yeah.
I'm leaving the power kind of loose. Well, let's go and plug it in. Again, the 6 inputs, the 6 power connectors down here are more heavily filtered, since this is very much an analog module. And because analog filters can be noisy, I'm going to plug it into one of these inputs down here, so it gets more filtered power and hopefully is a little bit quieter. So I have to pick a digital module down here to run down to one of these jacks. That's why I'm leaving things a little bit loose right now.
Yeah.
Next, we come into my effects section, and that's kind of like the home stretch here. And let's go ahead and move the camera over so I can focus on that a bit more. I am really big on having effects in general. The way that my previous live system is I would do what I would call live dub remixes of all my drum patterns and things like that. So I like having not just a delay and a reverb, but things with CV inputs, filters on them, things like that, ping pong delays or whatever. So in addition to having a delay module and a reverb module, I have this infrastructure of modules around them to allow me to do more bendy stuff with them. For example, my favorite reverb module by far is the Happy Nerding Effects Aid. It is a multi-effect. It can do many other things, phase, flange, delay, crush, etc. But he has a web interface with dozens upon dozens of algorithms, and you can choose which 32 to load into it. And I've loaded it full of reverbs because even though it's just a spin chip, it's among the best sounding reverbs I've heard. Some standalone pedals can still be a little bit clearer, but this sounds freaking good. Really fantastic, actually.
Yeah.
So that's an important and very important part of my system. I did replace the Black Davies knobs with conical shaped rubber knobs to make it easier to get in between the controls.
Yeah, the spin chip, it's a very simple way to do DSP, but Sean Costello's work from Valhalla on the Halls of Valhalla card for Tip Top is really great work. It really makes that thing sing. It's a lovely sounding reverb. And then, as you say, something like a Strymon, Big Sky, they're running a hell of a lot more power and current and processing power than a spin chip. But the comparisons from Igor between some of those Big Sky algorithms against the effects aid, he's doing really tremendous work with that thing.
I am really stunned with what Igor has gotten out of a spin chip. Great sounds, CVable. So you can do a lot of fun room size changes, things like that, which has been the downfall of many other reverb modules. Um, I'm just blown away by this thing. And for the first time, rather than just having reverb as an ambience, reverb has now become a real instrument for me that I will select a reverb and purposely set it and change it during a song as an effect now, rather than just picking a cool one and hanging that with that for the whole song.
Yeah. How does it take to modulate to things like room size? Because do you get those like delay shifting artifacts that you would expect, or is it quite clean?
So far, on the algorithms I've tried it on, it's been shockingly smooth rather than glitchy.
Good.
I am sure there's some algorithms that's going to glitch.
Yeah.
He has some algorithms that are supposed to be CVable room size.
Okay.
But I've been really impressed with how I can modulate this, and it's smooth. It doesn't glitch out on me.
Vertical mammal. Do you have any thoughts, Chris, on the Halls of Valhalla or the ZDSP or ZDSP in general?
I have a ZDSP in the Monster, and I have the Halls of Valhalla card in it. And it's a very good sounding reverb. Personal taste, I like the effects aid even better. And that's a personal taste thing. Also, I just got an E520 Hyperion, which is a very large module. So the ZDSP and the Magneto have actually come out of the Monster, and now it's a Hyperion and an effects aid.
Okay. Where are they?
Yeah, that's going to be controversial.
Where are they going to go? Where's the Pause ZDSP and the Magneto going to go?
They're going to, well, right now they're sitting in one of the bins underneath the modular.
I love the term bins. It's just a purely English to American thing, like it's sat there in the trash. Yeah, I'd bin the Magneto.
Yeah.
Slightly different twist to that word in England too.
I have four bins underneath my Monster that are labeled waiting to try, holding, which means I've tried it, I like it, but there's no room, make video, then sell, and then to sell or trade.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
they're in the holding bin right now if you're curious.
Yeah. Yeah. How does the reverb compare to the herb verb? Mark, the herb verb strength really, I'd say for me, but just generally for everyone, I would imagine, is how modulatable that is. It's such a malleable, shapeable, sculptable reverb. Things like you can clock the pre-delay, so your reverbs come in a perfect 16th note or 8th note after them. You can pull and shrink and feedback the thing. But it's a very different tone to a kind of standard reverb to my ear. It's a very musical kind of sound design tool. And of course, it really is sculpted well by Tom Herb to work within a modular system. I think that something like the Halls of Valhalla is a more kind of universally, I'd say, richer sound, lusher sound. That's not to say that the opposite of that is in any way a bad thing. Everything has its place. It's a bit like when people talk about clean sounds as opposed to like big rich sounds. It sounds better, the big rich one. Oh, I want the big rich one. But everything can't always be big and rich, otherwise it's too competing. So I would just say it's just not quite maybe the lushness of something like the Halls of Valhalla card, but super sculptable. The effects aid seems more in the kind of traditional, like it's a bigger processor reverb kind of sound. There's a lot of comparison to the Big Sky from what I've seen.
Yeah, Big Sky and also the Space.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. As just a reverb, the reverb is not to my ears because it's a bit thinner and more metallic, and that's particularly an issue with all these percussion sounds that really can splatter. But in terms of being a CVable sound design tool, it's amazing.
Absolutely.
So my performance mixer, which is just down here, has two effect sets. And usually one is for reverb and one is for delay. And I have both of my effects coming back into stereo channels on my mixer. So I can say, take the output of the echo and then pass that through the reverb as well. The problem is that the performance mixer will not let you send a reverb and echo at the same time. You have to pick one or the other. And with that chain, the first delay, the initial sound would be clean, and then the echoes would be reverbed. And I wanted my initial sound to have reverb as well. So what I've done is I put a little Erica Pico A mix in front of the reverb, and I actually bring into it the reverb send, but also the delay send, which I've split. So I can put in a little bit of the delay send into the reverb. So that initial sound going to the echo gets reverb. Then I can go ahead on the mixer, bring up the echo repeats, and also patch that into the reverb as well. And that's been my way of getting layered effects rather than do you want reverb or do you want echo? Sorry, you can't have both.
Yeah.
So all these little utility modules that solve these little problems.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned that about the first episode, is that you hadn't really thought of all these little modules to do these little tasks. But for me, this case has been in service for coming up on 2 years. It's on this 22nd or 23rd iteration now. It's all been about, oh, I wish you could do that. Well, then let's change it to do that.
Yeah. I mean, a tip, thinking of these little modules to do little things, something like a disting is a fantastic little helper for most things like that. If you wanted a tempo synced pre-delay on a reverb, and lots of reverbs like the ZDSP ones don't have pre-delay controls, you could use a tempo sync delay, low feedback, 100% wet, to shift off by a musical tempo division, and then have that feed the input of the reverb. So you're always offsetting a musical pre-delay. It's an interesting way of kind of forcing these things onto modules that don't have those settings.
Yeah, do it in another module and chain them. Yeah. That's what Modular is about. But it is, there's usually a way to patch yourself around any shortcoming. So that's why I have all these little modules built in. And you'll see that comes to my delay chain. And I'm going to build it out in reverse order to explain the dilemma. Delay. I've been through several delays. I like clocked delays so I can set up all sorts of rhythmic patterns. And my favorite of that so far has been the 4MS dual looping delay. It's not only is it clockable, you have all these really nice time divisions of the clocks coming in, including odd numbers as opposed to just quarters, eighths, sixteenths, triplets, etc. So you can do like a 5 and a 7 division. I will quite often get on either side, say a divide by 8 with like a divide by 7 and a divide by 9. So I'm hitting on either side of what would be the perfect delay division. It has reverse function and all sorts of other fantastic things about it. Tool sides, stereo, very high fidelity. The two issues I had with it is one, what if I want to lower its fidelity to get more of a tape sort of sound, or more of a natural acoustic sound where the echoes sound different than the original. But also, I like stereo motion, and I really wanted the sides to ping pong back and forth with each other. I could take their sends and returns I have on the front panel, run them through attenuators to then take the signal, mix it in, and bounce it to the other side. But instead, I've paired up the 4MS with this module from IntelliGel called a mix-up. Mm-hmm. And mix-up is a stereo mixer with 2 mono ends and 2 stereo ends. So what I do is I bring my effect send into the mono end, send that at a pretty high level onto the delay, take the send outs from the delay, bring them back to the stereo end, cross-patched left and right. At a lower level, that becomes my feedback control, and then take the output of this to feed the input of the delay. So I'm basically externally wiring my feedback path and taking advantage of that to flip the left and right channels as part of my feedback path.
Yeah, that's like the cross-feed settings on the DAW Logic's stereo delay. You have an individual feedback for each side, but you can also have a cross-feed feedback as well.
So some interesting patterns result of having these individual time adjustments, because by flipping and flopping, you're playing around with the math. So say I have on one side a divide by 7 and one side, take 7 clicks, another side take 9 clicks. For the first repeats, they're da-da. Mm-hmm. But when they're flipped, they're added to each other, and they come back on the same beat again.
Yep.
But then they're flipped, and then they separate again. So I get these delay patterns that are da-da, da, da-da, da, through that feedback of flipping the left and right and having different divisions on the left and right side. Rather than just one side going da, 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 and the other side going da, 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 da. They're playing with each other, and I happen to personally like that motion more.
It kind of doubles, without that having to wait twice as long for the pattern, it kind of doubles the feel of the delay time into some kind of longer, multi-tap kind of feel.
Yeah, for me, it's important that the delay becomes its own instrument.
Yeah.
Its own part to the music, not just an augmentation of a part. Okay, so that's part of my dilemma. The other part is I like to have filter in my feedback path as well. So I can either lo-fi it, resonate to pick out a particular frequency, high pass, low pass, or do the tape effect where it decays, either the bottom rolls off or the high end rolls off. So in between the mix-up and the DLD, I have a WMD Overseer stereo filter. So this allows me to do that, low pass or high pass filtering, depending on which side of 12 o'clock I'm on. But it also has this wonderful tilt function where it will treat the left and right channels differently depending on how you have it so-called tilted. Then that combined with my left and right channel reversed feedback path and ping-ponging creates all this evolution in those repeats rather than doing do, 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 do. They feed on each other and go in different directions with every successive repeat.
Yeah. Stereo filters in effects chains is something I'm really playing around with a lot. I'm currently filming, hopefully video ready for the end of this week, the Moon Phase from Patching Panda stereo filter, and using a mono effects chain, which has been the Bafako Crush Delay, lovely noisy PT goodness, and the digital brick on the Music Thing Modular Spring, just for a splash of additional reverb after the delays, and then going into the filter either in a feedback path or even just after the effects, and then creating these stereo shifts, frequency spanning filters, obviously frequency and resonance modulation. It's been a really lovely, lush way to get a lot of interesting stereo movement on an otherwise basic, fairly static effects chain.
Yeah. I actually created a video called My 3-Module Delay Chain, which I think you can put the link up or show that, where I show building out the patch and the difference each module makes in the patch and the results of it. And shows why I go through all that trouble and why I'm spending that many HP just for a freaking echo.
I did put the link in the chat earlier, but it's in there again for anyone watching. And there it is on screen. For we won't play it. People can watch the link afterwards, but there we go.
Yeah, I'm very happy. It's become part of my quote-unquote sound. And then I also modulate the filter cutoff and overseer from one of my modulation modules periodically or manually, play with the feedback amounts. I love that delay chain I come up with, and I'm looking at maybe recreating it on the Monster as well, just because I'm so happy with it. All right, last module. And I really debated this one because it's been in and out of the case. And that's a WMD Muscle stereo compressor. I've had it in the case, and I've had this stupid thing where we joke that squirrels have no memories, and I must be a squirrel. I'll put it in the case, play with it at home, going, I really don't like my sounds compressed. I like them clean and airy, so I don't need it. And then I go play with other people where they have all these loud, sustaining instruments, and I go, man, I really wish I could compress my signals so I could compete with them.
Yeah.
So it's been in and out and in and out, and it so happens that in Meridian Alpha, we're using a Zoom LiveTrack L12 mixer recorder, and it does have compressors on the input channels. And I said, Jim, could you just put me in a couple channels with compressors and compress me that way? But then I decided to put the muscle back in. I'm going to try using it again, mastering it again, and using, if anything, just as a limiter where I can go ahead and crank up into it.
Yeah.
And see if that works in situations where I have to compete with guitarists, etc. So this is actually patched into the very convenient stereo end of chain send and returns on the WMD performance mixer without having to, then it will appear in my headphone queue, etc. So that's the last module. Compressor, I'm going to try using it again. It's been in and out. I think this just, down to me not spending the time to master compression. And I find if I just carve out a day and do it, that it's worth it.
Yeah.
And I just need to find that day.
Yeah. I wish Well, there's not much room in 4HP, but I wish it had a dry wet. I think that would instantly make it a kind of keeper for you, because you can get that, oh, it feels a little bit too compressed, but then simply just bring some dry back in. And that just brings those transients in. This New York style compression or parallel compression is a really common production technique where you deliberately push the compression further than you would want, but then offset the wet level with some dry level blended back in. And I think it's almost a safety net. If there's a certain amount, around half of the dry signal coming through, almost doesn't matter how compressed it is. I mean, it does, but it's a huge safety net of not listening back afterwards and going, oh God, I squashed and killed that thing. So yeah.
It sounds like it'd be easier to control in a live situation too, rather than having to play with thresholds and release times just to be able to mix in how hard it's hitting.
Yeah, you could you would know the patch you were performing with or the system well enough that you could look at all that and dial it in. And then it becomes like an amount control then, without adjusting anything.
Maybe I need another utility mixer in here.
Maybe someone needs to design a really cool stereo send-returny dry-wet thing. I'm saying that as if I'm joking around like I've got one coming. I don't. But that would be nice.
However,
I've notes on paper. I don't mind sharing that one for that kind of thing. But we'd be years off if that was something I was doing. But that would be nice and handy for anyone watching that has any influence on a new one or designs modules themselves. That would be really cool.
Yeah, I agree. And it is an issue with live performance because I really try to make this case as bulletproof as it can be in live performance. The WMD mixer does have +4 outs, even though they're on 3.5 millimeters. For a while, I had a transformer isolated output module on this because I had bad memories of doing live sound in clubs in the 80s of really horrendous problems with ground loops. Haven't had problems yet, so I took that out and made room for other modules in the case. But a lot of it is, tweaking this case not just to be the sounds that I like, but also what problems have come up live. Let's solve them with modules so that I can just stay in the flow rather than being troubleshooting while I'm supposed to be listening to other people and improvising.
Yep. The Analog Kid in the live chat says you could do parallel compression using one of the auxiliary loops on the performance mixer. Yes, but it would be in mono and not stereo.
And I'm already using them. I'm already using this end.
Yeah, becomes tricky.
Throwing another mixer at it would probably do it.
Effects Music says they were told that send and return was not modern anymore in modular setups. I'm not quite sure what that means.
Not modern.
I don't get that statement.
Well, I'm still part of the ponytail brigade, so
maybe the feeling is that modular is an environment where you can do more than a traditional mixer setup, or simply that a lot of modern modular mixers just don't have send and returns. So maybe that's what they mean, or that's what they've been told. It is absolutely a technique that wants exploring. More send and return type options, more parallel mixing options. Absolutely. I think it kind of needs to come in for more flexibility for me in a modular system. Definitely.
Oh yeah, I the fact that I've got all these inputs on this mixer means I can really separate out. The kick gets a boom reverb, the hats get this timed delay. That gets a little bit of reverb. This really excites the reverb and creates a big sound and rings out. I really like that send thing of tailoring how much of an effect each of my instruments take. And that's where this being a percussion case makes it a bit different than your standard synthesizer voice. I'm not playing like 1, 2, 3, or 4 synth voices at a time. I could be playing 6, 8 different percussion tracks at a time, in addition to a couple synth voices. So I really needed a lot of inputs and that ability to custom treat each of those inputs. So that's why send and return worked for me. Now, I still have chains, such as my 3-module delay chain and things like that, is a very linear thing that could be end of chain as well in the patch. So I guess I have a little bit of a hybrid setup, but it depends on what you're trying to do. And, it's not one size fits all or one solution fits all.
Yeah. Cat Scan Meow Make Noise is always promoting a decentralized mixing system. Yeah, Tony for the first 3 Super Boosts, I think I had a In Conversation with Make Noise was the title of the videos, and Tony Rolando and I would just go sit outside at Super Booth and just chat kind of freely away from the show, and we just kind of freewheel on that. And that was a question I asked, with the kind of advent of all these performance-based mixers a couple of years ago, will we see that, or is that something you're interested in a modular system? And he spoke about liking this decentralized mixing idea of things like Optomixes being able to sum their 2 channels and a sum input, and kind of working through that way. And I do think lots of small mixers are often really important in a system, but I also see the benefits of the performance mixers and having send and returns to route any sound to any particular effect. One reverb module can feed the whole system. That's a little bit hard, well, a lot harder potentially on a decentralized mixing system to actually do that.
And I do have decentralized mixing in here as well. I do have a separate sub-mixer for the oscillators and sub-octave. I do have a separate mixer blending my effect sends to different modules. I do have a separate mixer in the feedback path of the echo. So there are sections in here where I am doing that level of sub-mixing in individual modules as part of the patch. But as I mentioned, I'm also used to doing live sound. I used to do that, as back far as my teens and in my 20s, doing live sound in front of bands. So I'm also very comfortable with hands-on faders, blending and mixing that way as well.
Yeah. So we'll say, as we've kind of got to where we needed to be today, with the case fleshed out, we're not in...
I haven't looked at the clock. How far are we?
2 hours and 15 minutes. That's not bad for...
Oh, that's not bad at all.
29 modules and a lot of conversation.
This is where we finished Saturday. We finished the last module at 2 hours and 15 minutes, and somehow we still ended up going 3 hours Saturday.
Yeah. I've got time. No, we're not in any particular rush. It's not like we need to leave in 5 minutes, but kind of let's go into a general final call for questions with a
happy to chat.
Soft kind of limit on it to some degree. Anything we've mentioned today, you're welcome to ask about other modules from the bottom of the case. I'll pull up the modular grid for us to look at again, and I'll also put the link in the live chat.
Yeah.
Here's the case.
The top half of this case is obviously what I focus on a lot when I'm performing. It's the percussion modules and the effects. The bottom half, aside from being the mixer, is like the add-ons, the melodic portion for when I'm doing solo work, and also having that acoustic input section.
Yeah.
It's versatile. This is my instrument, or my orchestra, or my backing band, or whatever you want to call it. It's become a very personal thing.
Yeah. A direct quote, actually, talking about sends, was Igor at Happy Nerding that made the effects aid that we spoke about earlier. The quote was, actually, aux channels are way outdated. It was a good thing for mixing consoles, but for modulars, you can do whatever you want without any dedicated auxes. Send and returns, they mean. Well, yeah, I kind of get the statement. It's maybe a bit easy to maybe take that as a ruling out using send and returns. That may not be what Igor means, is my kind of take on that, rereading it a couple of times, in that you can do what you want. You could patch straight in and out. The effects aid, it could literally be oscillator, effects aid, and then the rest of the patch. It could be on a send, doesn't have to be. Effects aid could be in a feedback loop. You could also have done all that on a console anyway. You've got inserts on consoles, and you could route feedback around patch bays and things. So,
I mean, the effects aid is only 4 HP, and it does have a dry wet knob. I do keep it 100% wet all the time because it is my loop, my effects loop. But it is small enough, and it has enough different algorithms that you could certainly consider putting a few of them around a system and patching them at different points for different voices or individual modules, etc.
Yeah. I mean, an effects aid on a send return, lovely. So yeah, I can't really speak to that. Igor's not here to discuss, so I don't know what his intention was. But yeah, you could patch it wherever you want. So we'll see. Any other questions? The overseer Chris mentioned has tilt. Is that an EQ tilt? It's a frequency tilt, so it will tilt the cutoff on each side like a seesaw. The overseer is basically,
you can think of the overseer as being two mono filters that have shared control for cutoff. But what the tilt does is an internal voltage bias saying on one channel, we'll subtract some voltage from the cutoff of that filter, and the other channel will add some voltage to the cutoff of that filter. And particularly in my case, since I'm running separate left and right repeats through the overseer, this gives me the ability to sculpt. Is the first repeat duller or brighter compared to the second repeat? So I will quite often use tilt to sculpt the tone or the note or whatever you want to call it, or the harmonization of the echoes. So it goes like bish bo or boo bish, get different effects on the repeats just by tilting and having different filtering on the first and second echoes.
Yeah. Not sure if we answered, they say, but do you use the Crucible for more ride and crash cymbal-like sounds or hi-hats?
I tend to use it more for the shorter. Well, I use it a couple different ways. I tend to use it for the very short hi-hat sounds. I think it excels at that. I also will put it into its really clanky, odd mode with longer sounds if I want strange, alien, struck, longer metallics, like really distorted, beat up, stomped on, cracked cymbals. And the third thing is it does have an input on it. It is also a resonator. So you can send other sounds through it as if you had a transducer and a contact mic on a cymbal. And what that's been particularly useful for is I'll take the digital noise out of the ARC noise rainbow, tune it down very slow, or I'll take beats out of the marbles, crank up jitter and crank the tempo up very fast to get a very erratic set of spikes, send that through the input on Crucible, and get this strange, like frying radiation sort of sound out of it as well.
Frying radiation, it's a good term.
There is one of the Meridian Alpha songs where thematically you're going through the radiation belt. And when we're in the danger zone, the second movement of that song, that's one of the things I bring up is that frying sound that I'll then bring up and tone shape on Crucible and fade in and out that way, in addition to going over to the folk tech and just thrashing the hell out of it with lots of reverb and booming out. And that's the Chaos We're Going to Die section. Jim writes all these carefully structured things, this section and this section, and then I give these thematic things like the "We're going to die" section.
A little more depth, please.
Just so I can get into a mood, when I'm playing.
Holland Mundy asks, what do we have to say about the Doepfer A138M matrix mixer? They use one channel for the dry signal and 3 as sends. Didn't find any other good solutions. Love matrix mixers. Absolutely love matrix mixers. For lots of things. Yeah,
that sounds like a good idea.
Let me, with the power of the wheelie chair, give me 1 second. I will grab. It's unfortunately on 1/4-inch jacks, but adapters exist, so it's not an issue.
That's okay. We get to stare at the Dalek-like thing behind you when you're not sitting there.
Oh yeah, this thing. That's something for another day.
Oh yeah, tease us.
Yeah, tease you with it.
It's all right. It's okay.
The matrix mixer that I actually got from Constantine, who's in the chat that we do the single malt synthesis chats with. Passive matrix mixer, so 4 ins that feed 4 outs. The idea being that the single input then can be routed in varying amounts to the 4 different outs. So things I like to do with effects would be have, say, input 1 is my dry sound, that feeds a delay, but the delay comes back into channel 2. So I can then turn up 2, so it's feeding itself to create a feedback loop, or I could go out of 2 into something else. So you create these kind of like cascading networks of feedback through them. But even just as a simple routing device, a really nice way, in fact this was on my Patreon page, we have a Discord server that's exclusive to people that support me on Patreon. And we have a question of the day. And it came up recently, a question of the day was kind of matrix mixers as a talking point and a series of questions. And a nice way to look at it, I thought, was to take a 4-piece band and think of 4 different headphone mixes or monitor mixes. Let's say drummer, guitarist, bass player, singer. The drummer wants to hear lots of himself, none of the bass player, a little bit of the guitar, and all like full vocals. They want to follow the vocals. The bass player wants no drums, none of themselves, and just loads of guitar. The guitarist wants lots of drums and lots of vocal. And you kind of see where I'm going. It's only 4 inputs. Yeah. But like a series of auxiliary sends on a mixer, you're feeding custom mixes. And of course, you're patching out back to an in. You then have this feedback loop as well. They're really simple. It's just effectively a load of sockets wired together and a few resistors. a load of pots, sorry, wired to the sockets, but super handy. I'd like to try something like the 4MS matrix mixer to then have CV, like because it's a full VCA matrix. So, Holland Monday, that sounds great. I've not tried the actual, A138M, but yeah.
Doesn't Livestock have a matrix mixer with presets as well?
That's a sort of CV matrix style thing. Are you thinking of
matrix? You don't know if it's audio.
Are you thinking of the Livestock Maze? Is that the one you're thinking of?
Yeah.
That one, let me pull it up. There is a video of Maze. It's a sequential matrix as well. I think it's more for CV. I'm not sure if it will actually process audio at all. Let me...
Sure.
A routing and mixing matrix module. Yes. In fact, yes, it does do audio. I remember doing it in the video. There is the module, and there is the video. Yeah, the video titled Sequential Attenuverting Matrix Mixer and Signal Router. There we go.
You're putting this out to the chat, I'm taking it?
yeah, that's in the chat. How does Marbles go with the vector? And do you dislike sequencers like a Hermod due to its menu diving?
Yeah, those questions that get me in trouble. Marbles works perfectly fine with vector, but they're both following the clock from Pamela for what it's worth. And what I'll use Marbles quite often for is not only a couple additional rhythmically oriented clock outputs, but more often I use it for the CV outputs, where it's kind of like a clocked random step in its own right. The really cool thing about Marbles is it does have these things like the bias and the spread controls, where you can go ahead and say, let's stay all on one voltage, let's split out to just high and low voltages, let's have a mixture of voltages, rather than just being a straight attenuator. It's more selective. And bias to tilt towards high voltages, tilt towards low voltages, spread them out evenly. The other really cool thing about Marbles is that you can go ahead and set lengths of how many step patterns there are and play with a deja vu parameter to say once you get locked into a pattern of CVs, either keep repeating that pattern or by knocking the deja vu slightly off of 12 o'clock, start having randomized sets of voltages. So it's a little bit like a clay sequencer in that regard. They can evolve. So for me, this is very much a timed modulation module that's more intelligent than just a random source through an attenuator.
Yeah.
That's my main use of Marbles. And it took me a while to crack Marbles. I had one for a while, and I didn't, maybe too harsh to say I didn't get it for a week or two, but it was just like, I know you can do something really cool here. I haven't found it yet.
Yeah.
We're going to keep working at it. And then I got there, I'm like, oh, yeah, this is so much better than just a such and such. But they both get clocked from vector. I don't necessarily use it, with vector, but as something that's controlling a different line than the vector is controlling. Mm-hmm. And in terms of the Hermod, I mean, there's lots of cool stuff. And I was a computer jockey. I went from editing tape to using Pro Tools and doing everything on the screen. I mean, everything. Ableton Live since version 1.0, blah, blah, blah. So it's not like I'm anti-computer. But when it comes to live performance, I want something that's flatter and not menu diving oriented. And that's why I like the immediacy of the vector with all those encoders, all of that display. Yes, there's menus. You can do some extremely powerful things with it if you want to dive in. But I find the vector to be very immediate to play as a sequencer rather than pre-programming something really cool, just letting it play that back on its own.
Yeah. It's just about which one speaks to you. I've seen people do some really cool stuff with a Hermod.
Oh, yeah.
As with most of these modules, it just depends on what speaks to most people. Tobias asked, Chris, if they remember correctly, you have much less mults in your monster system. Apart from the amount of modules and size issues, why less mults in the large studio system?
Because with a live studio system, I'll go ahead and rely on patching cables to split. I mean, I do have a few buffered mults in there. I'm staring off into space with the modulars just to the right of the camera. Yeah. So I'm looking at it going, hey, let's talk to each other.
That's my look. If I'm doing this, it's like, where is it?
Off the screen.
Yeah.
I do have fewer mults in it because I will rely much more on passive mults, the hex
Yeah.
wheels, doppio splitters, things like that, quite often with the big system. But also something you haven't seen with a Monster is it has a sister case, a custom-made case by a company called Gentle Electric. It was done back in the 70s. That provides a dozen VCOs, several attenuators, offsets, but also has rows of mults on it as well. And I've just had a new cabinet made for it. I'm in the process of finishing off rebuilding its power supply. So I have this cabinet that sits next to the Monster that provides another dozen VCAs, rows and rows of mults, other CV processing. So that's why you don't see as many in the Monster. But all of that said, the Monster, I don't mind having cables dangling around and passive mults floating in midair. With this system, it was very important for me to be able to set up the backbone patch, close the lid with the patch intact, go somewhere, open it up, and 3/4 of my patch is there, ready to go. And then I just live patch the modulation, what trigger source is hitting what percussion module, etc. And because of that, I have a lot of mult modules already in here because they're so low profile, and I can pre-patch to those rather than having cables and hex splitters floating loose inside here.
Yeah, makes sense. Tobias Domes, so is the Overseer a kind of DJ filter? We think of it like that, where it will low pass as you turn one way and high pass as you turn the other, but works very well beyond just being an output DJ style filter as well.
Yeah, I think they originally designed it to be an end-of-chain DJ filter.
Yeah, and
it's
nice just to roll all the high end off and go to the rumble, or take all the low end out, pull it back down for a transition. Works really well.
A lot of resonance. It has different shapes or different acuity of how the sounds are, whether it's a mellow effect or a deep effect. And you can also patch it to be separate low pass and high pass controls. You don't need to use a single knob. But yeah, they tend to demo, and it has an on-off switch, an engage-disengage switch on it as well. So they very much designed it to be an end-of-chain DJ thing. It just happened to be the perfect solution for my particular echo chain. Before this, I had an Echophon and another filter, and it kept changing what the filter was. I particularly like the surge variable slope filter in the feedback path of the Echophon. And I kind of missed the transposition of the Echophon. That was a fun thing as well. I've even considered putting an Erica Pico effects in here just so I could have the transposition as well in my feedback path. But yeah, it works for me.
Mac Booth asked, do any of your modules cause noise issues? Are there any
Yep.
particular culprits, or rather than name and shaming culprit style, any key areas to really look for?
There's 3 areas of this thing that will cause noise. One is that I tend to run the Overseer filter or whatever filter I've had in my feedback path at somewhat high resonance, and that will cause the noise inside the system to really get peaked and be audible.
Yeah.
So you can hear a little bit of a in the background out of that. That's one issue. Plonk has a little bit of a digital whine to it. Now that I'm patching it into this more heavily filtered bus board, I'm curious to see if that knocks down some of the digital whine. Entity has some really cool things where it has a VCA built in, but there's also envelopable things like pitch or whatever. So you can get yourself into situations where the VCA is open, but otherwise you've killed the sound generator. And in that case, from the Entity, you can hear noise from it as well. I need to play with the decay envelope, which is on this little control up here. Or I have considered just bringing with me a Rocktron Hush single-ended noise reduction unit and putting that on the end of the case just to knock out all those little things. When I record this case, those noises become an issue. So I make a point of recording some samples without any music playing of what the background noise of the case is like, so I can use a spectrum-based noise reducer to then remove that from the signal. But that's another reason why I got the DB25 breakout for the performance mixer, so I could put all those sound sources on their own stems, not have them contributing to the overall mix, maybe noise reduce them individually as needed.
Yeah.
So I've got that to fall back on for real studio quality mixing of this case.
Yeah. Yeah, you could also try phase inverting as well, which sometimes works, but the noise isn't always so perfectly static that you'll get a perfect phase cancellation. But that and like an Isotope RX,
Yeah.
I I think I'm still on RX6, and they often run like a $29 for the Elements, like smaller version, the less advanced version. But $29, it's a hell of a lot of noise reduction when you need it.
Yeah.
So I definitely suggest picking that one up.
I use Adobe Audition for a lot of my finishing, and it just happens to have a spectral noise reducer built into it. It's pretty darn good.
Liquid Acoustics asks, we did touch on it slightly and may have missed it, but how do you patch the Pico TG in the percussion section?
Yeah, quite often if I want to have a sound ring out longer than just an impulse, I will take the trigger out from grids, Euclidean circles, etc., run that into the TG, and set my gate duration that I want for that particular sound before it releases. But the other thing that I've been using it for quite often is taking the accent outs from grids, which are only very short pulses, and then using the TG to extend it out by ear to be a beat, 2 beats or whatever, and then use that to choke Chimera or Crucible so that I have something that's a very musical duration that then gets choked off at the end of that, rather than being just a triggered impulse sort of thing.
Yeah.
The extra little flavor is that it does have this probability control, which goes in between 0 and the full length that you've set, and that's also CVable as well. So I'll have fun with like maybe setting something as exactly, say, 2 beats, but then play around with a little bit of probability just to have a little bit of variation. So it cuts off a bit earlier, a little bit later, just get some variation from measure to measure.
Yeah. In the spirit of, because I can see, no, they're not mounting too bad, but the chat is running faster than we're asking questions currently. Knobs and Strings asked, now that all the modules are in, could Chris explain again how he patches the PAMs and the PEXP1 expander, which modules get clocked by it? You said that everything is clocked from PAMs. That's the heartbeat of the system.
Right. Output 1, I have a lot of this memorized now. Output 1 goes to the milligrids clock in, so it gets the 24 PPQN, so it can do triplets. Then I take a 16th clock, which is a fairly common thing in my system. I used to need the 16th clock to clock the bit box. Now it goes externally on a clocking cable to my 1010 black box. This lovely little thing, which I use for a lot of my sample loops, things like that. That wants a 16th note clock in, so that comes from Pamela. I'll send a 16th note quite often to Euclidean circles as well, but I'll have that on a programmable output, so I can change it to be eighths, quarters, or whatever. It's clocking Euclidean circles. I then also take a 16th note and send that to Marbles. Marbles has a clock divider built into its front panel, so I can leave that hard patched, then go ahead and change the division on the front of Marbles, so the car version of it, to be whatever timing division that I want. And then another version of that gets split off to clock the 4MS DLD. A copy of the DIN sync output from the PXP is sent to this little gray cable to the vector sequencer, so it also runs off of that clock. I'll also take a clock division, usually a quarter note clock division, and run it into the parameter input for the Clavis twin waves for its second side to have a clocked LFO setting. I think that's pretty much. And then I also use the DIN sync and MIDI out to send to other musicians that I'm playing with. Quite often the guitarist wants a MIDI out because a lot of their delays, particularly the Eventide stuff, likes MIDI in for clock divisions. And then I'll send the DIN sync out to Jim Coker, who I play with quite often, and then plugs that into his vector sequencer so he follows mine.
Yeah.
So lots of clock divisions. So that's choose up the top 4 outputs, or the top few outputs from Pamela and this expander. I keep 2 of the jacks open so I can freely reprogram them depending on what I need it to be. I'll have something that's, say, something that's 2 bars long that only stays high for 2 beats and a fraction. And I'll run that into an AND gate with another pattern. So I get a pattern for the first 2 beats of the first measure, then it basically mutes the pattern for the next measure and a half, then comes back in again with a pattern for the third measure. So I'll play around with programmable outputs from Pamela's through the logic to basically mute and unmute other patterns. And then the bottom row of Pamela is pretty much divided for sine wave output, it's timed to the clock, a couple stepped randoms at different timing intervals, all running through the levitate, so they're all up on jacks with attenuators. I can patch anywhere that I want.
Yeah. link your Discord to your Patreon. Okay.
Ben's being a keyboard warrior in the chat, trying to keep up with the chat as well.
Yeah, some love for the DivKid Patreon Discord server, which is a really cool place because of people that are in this live chat that engage daily with the question of the day. It's growing. I'm learning more about Discord. Some help from Dual Tracks that's often in the live streams. I'm not sure if he's been in today. Offered to help and offered some advice, which was great. Great supporter as well. Gerald mentioned needing to get in there. The easiest way to get into any exclusive Discord server, whoever's it is to integrate your Patreon page as a supporter of various people with your Discord account. Because through Patreon, as the creator side of it, I can create different perks that link directly into Discord. It's fully kind of integrated. So you simply link that up, and if that is an available perk for someone you support, you're just kind of invited straight in. I can also get invite links to people if anyone's having trouble. 256K Labs, I've put a link in the chat, says that they have designed a matrix mixer, which we can also take a quick look at. There we go. Kind of module version of what I had. 4 in, 4 out. Bank of jacks.
It certainly looks pretty.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks good. It says coming soon. Maybe let us know in the chat how far off that is.
Is it CVable, or is it memories, or is it passive or active, or?
It looks, I would guess, hopefully they're still in the chat to answer. I'll see in a second. It looks passive. 4 in, 4 out. So it doesn't look like a VCA matrix, but that's fine with me. I would definitely like more matrices in my life. Matrices, if that's the word.
Yeah, not only for the audio, but I think matrix mixers can be very cool for... sorry, I moved on you there.
Okay, I'll shift.
For CVs, and also sending different amounts of CVs, mixing envelopes of CVs to different destinations. Kind of the feeling a little bit of the macro.
Yeah, that was again when the matrix mixer came up in the question of the day that I have again in the Patreon Discord server. The CV example of having, say, 4 modulations, let's say an envelope, an LFO, an audio rate source, and some stepped random. You may have 4 things you want to modulate. Let's keep it simple. Think of a synth voice and just say pulse width, filter cutoff, filter resonance, and say decay time on your envelope. To be able to quickly and easily blend, okay, PWM, I want a lot of the LFO and a little bit of this audio rate overtone. Filter cutoff, I want loads of envelope, quite a bit of stepped random, and just a touch of LFO. Decay time, I want, tons of the stepped random. The audio rate's useless for me in this particular patch. To go through and really kind of tailor these things just simply on that, simple little 4x4 set of knobs. So yeah, for CV, it's a really cool thing.
I'm trying to remember, were we talking to the folks at Rabbit Elephant? But this conversation came up of also taking the audio outputs of your percussion modules and feeding that back in to modulate the CV inputs to get, in very tiny amounts, to get the feeling of the drums resonating each other in a room.
I can't remember where... Was that the Feeding the Monster series with Kim, and that came up in the chat?
I think it came up during one of those discussions. And I think maybe you were talking a bit about that, a little bit of patching, a little bit of the modulation.
I spoke about an example of that would be like a drum sample pack where you play the bass drum and it was just the bass drum in a room. There's no snare rattle. I lose interest in that a lot of the time. I mean, I like that hyper-realistic kind of samples laid over kind of sound, but I like sample packs where it's like I crank the snare and I can just hear the cymbals ring if I've done it hard enough. And those were the things when I was learning drums as a kid that I'd noticed that. Like if I really cranked the snare drum at school on a lunchtime, I'm like, why is there this like high ring? Like, oh, it's the ride cymbals going. But it's then real, that bleed, and you can set it up with, again, this is where Ascend and Return's really lovely. A good short room reverb to try and tie everything together. Just feed a little bit of everything into it, and they've got some sort of unifying tone. Another nice trick, it's a bit more DAW-centric, if you get a good amp simulator or speaker simulator, or a kind of guitar amp cab simulator, and use that in place of a reverb. So you're blending into... not a long time based effect, but one tonal kind of core it will pull together just, random samples you've picked out of the thin air almost quite nicely. You do that in a room where people play sound back out of studio monitors just into a cheap microphone and just record it back in, just catching some air, just some physical thing that sound was collected in. Works really nice. You need to make a decision up front for Maze. You don't mix and match. I think that's probably what threw me off. The dot for bipolar matrix mix is good for gates, adding and subtracting triggers for logic-like functionality. That's a really cool idea from CatScan Meow. To think of like
which module I missed that.
The dot for bipolar matrix mixer.
Oh, okay.
I like that idea. Steps are turning things off actively or pulling down other gates that may be open. As you say, it's a very logic-like function. That's cool.
Yeah.
If you run CV and MIDI, will one or the other tend to take control? I'm not sure what you mean there, Patrick Connolly. You can certainly run both. Do they mean the MIDI on the PAMs is an output?
It's just a clock out.
Yeah. If a module is not playable, then why have it in a modular? Yeah, it's been said a few times.
Well, I'll be contrarian. There's some modules that make really cool sounds that are difficult to use, and I will have more patience for them in my studio modular when I have time to wrestle that sound out of them. But in my live performance system, no, it has to be pretty immediate, or it's got to have a darn good reason for me to fight with it.
Yeah, and some things
different
inherently aren't playable. You don't play a mult, but it's been great. It's a useful thing.
I play mutes, isn't that? Well, kind of, maybe, no. All right.
Kind of. Yeah, kind of. It's kind of a switched mute in a way, switch mult in a way.
I did have one more thought triggered when the ask was on CV or MIDI and which one's taking precedence. One of the cool things about the 512 vector sequencer is that he's previously written sequencers that run on computers, which are used to having scheduling routines where you have to plan things out ahead of time and release them so they go out at the time you want. That philosophy has been carried over into his vector sequencer, so you can do MIDI and CV side by side, and one's not suffering because the other one's going on. They're coordinated very nicely.
Yeah, Patrick, sorry, I'm typing loudly. I was hammering away at trying to get through some of that. Yeah, I don't have a mute on the mic. I'm trying to ride it, but in between speaking, not speaking while the microphone is muted, and catching myself out. Yeah, sorry, there's a bit of a loud keyboard sound. Also, I
often get accused of murdering keyboards from people hearing me type. Why are you hitting it so hard?
Another question as we scroll down. We'll call it last call for questions. So get any last questions in. Of course, you can ask questions in the comments. And next week, the 8th of July, exactly the same time, Wednesday next week, we'll be streaming. And I'll put the link, I already have earlier, but I'll put the link in again before we finish. And I'll pin that as the top comment. So if you're watching this back or you want to come back to it later just for reference, the pinned top comment on this will be the link to the next show. Colin Benders calls the Matrix mixer the stroker, and I said, what do you mean? Like it strokes the signals, like it's massaging the signals? And Mark he said no. He went through all the modules in his setup explaining which he loved and which were used and which were not. He stroked all the modules that he loved, and the Matrix mixer was one that he stroked along with the verb. A friendly stroke, like a pat on the back.
There you go.
That's very good.
A connection.
Monstrous Moonshine, thank you very much. Super chat is enabled on here. There's a little $sign under the live chat. If you'd like to throw a bit of support our way, that's very much welcome. I'll find a way to feed that back into what we're doing. So of course not necessary, but really appreciated. If you would like to support both of us with a hell of a lot more benefits to doing so, if you head to patreon.com/learning modular to support Chris, there's access to his courses, lots of different tiers that get you different things, and patreon.com/divkid. I've started putting up some PDF patch books, which have been really well received. There's the Discord server as well, which has been really active, and some exclusive videos too.
Yeah, particularly if you're interested in what I'm doing with this system, I have a long-running series of articles on my own Patreon channel called My Geeking Case, the MGC series, where I've been over a year have been going through each change to the case and why this module went out, why this module came in, and other changes to it. And also after these feeding and patching threads, I create an annotated index of where everything is that we talked about, and then elaborate on stuff in the chat as well. So if you did find this interesting, you're going to find a lot more about this case in particular up on my Patreon channel.
They've been really useful. The index is purely to just go, what was that probability skipper that you mentioned? And just have it with a timed link. But also to get your take on it, because you, of course, can't do the bulk of what we're doing here, filling your case, while monitoring the live chat. That's my
I know,
job.
I don't get to watch the chat. I rarely even get to look at the computer screens. Like, it's kind of a weird thing, just talking to a camera going.
Constantine, what are you doing for a reset in the live case? It's a good question.
Good point. I forgot about that. One of my outputs from Pamela is also a reset every either 2 or 4 measures, usually 4 measures. And I set that to reset grids. I set it to reset Euclidean circles, and occasionally I'll use it for other things. And the reason I do that is I can get in trouble. I can get off beats by accidentally picking strange durations in Euclidean circles. And if I want to get back onto the beat, my reset that's coming out of Pamela will then, after 4 measures, bring things back onto the 1 again for me. Or I will play with that on purpose, where I'll set Euclidean to unusual step durations, like 13 steps or 7 steps, and let it kind of move around the pattern, then reset back to the top, then move around the pattern, reset back up to the top. So that is another thing that I do distribute throughout the system, is a reset. Thanks for reminding me. I forgot about that.
Yeah. A couple of modules mentioned. NLC do a CVable matrix mixer nonlinear circuits. Now let me pull a couple up. We might as well throw a few examples out where we're looking. Okay. They do, there we go, called a cluster. Oh, pictures have scrolled ridiculously. Yeah, a much denser kind of board and set of controls. Login also make the dub matrix, which is active with in and out mutes as well. And the one I mentioned earlier was the 4MS VCAM.
Yeah, that one. I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah, been around a long time, maybe going on 10-year-old module now. So maybe doesn't get the love that it should.
Ahead of its time.
Yeah. Quantum Spacing with a super chat. Huge thank you for that. Again, that does make a massive difference.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep. You can hold me accountable to buying Chris beer with this money if you like, or a drink of choice when we can see each other.
I'm jealous of that whiskey sampler you folks have been having on the Heinbach stream.
Yeah, in case anyone missed that, just quickly. The super chat support on the Super Booth streams that Constantine, that's in the chat, Heimbach and myself did, nicely added up to really support us. And as Single Malt Synthesis streams on Heimbach's channel was born out of Constantine and Heimbach joking that they'd hung out in worse bars than a Skype call. The idea was to have a whiskey and catch up, and that's really where that came from. And it's morphed into something a little more, but we all got a whiskey tasting set. So we've taken a little break for July. We are on summer holiday, but yeah, we try a whiskey, read some tasting notes. It's nothing too kind of snooty about it. We're all learning and trying nice whiskies. And yeah, we had Peter Blasser on, which was a hell of a time. He played some sellotape along to our jamming. I thought he was going to play his Tecante devices, and then there was this and I said, what's going on? oh, all right, it's Peter Blasser jamming on some packing tape. Which is good fun. Fake Helmy, which was 256K Labs that we shared the Matrix mixer of. They're setting up their shop right now. It's a passive, it's an active summing mixer. Is their Matrix mixer, and they're looking to set their shop up right now. That's cool.
Awesome.
Warden Buffett says it looks like the Kiwi Electronics passive standalone. I don't know that one, but I'll certainly be looking. Kiwi Electronics Matrix mixer. I'm keeping tabs open of what we've been talking about. And yeah, it's DC coupled as well, the 256K Labs one for mixing modulation. If anyone wants one, you can get in touch right now. I'll put the link in to that Matrix mixer for the 256K Labs, and hopefully the link is on there to get in touch, because you can't share unless you're an admin or the host of the stream. You can't share links on live chat. So a web link in there for people that are interested. Ooh, the chat's flown down again. Thank you, Production Sar, for the live chat, and Sana as well. The VCAM or VCA matrix and 4MS, the CV inputs have a strange mix of log response for the bottom half and exponential for the top half. Do you know why? That's why I ended up selling mine. It's that like S-curve.
Sounds like it.
Like thing, isn't it? I think. I've not tried it.
Everything's done for a reason.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
We'll have to ask him.
Yeah, we'll have to ask Dan about that one at some point. Do go hit thumbs up. That makes a big difference to YouTube sharing this. If people can go hit thumbs up if you've enjoyed it, that's a really super handy way to support it and get more eyeballs onto what we're doing, which helps.
And it lets us know whether or not you want more of these.
Yeah, do let us know in the comments. We have the 3rd episode coming next week, as we say, which will be patching this system. And beyond that, we're hoping to get Kim Bjorn back, that worked on the book Patch and Tweak with Chris. He's caught up at the minute with another project, so he's not free, but we'd like to get Kim back. We could look at what was my previous performance system, or look at re-pulling that back into what it may be now. I may have a monster case in my future. There's lots of potential. Chris and I are looking at doing, certainly for our Patreon supporters, something possibly monthly and a bit more regular, but also to continue this idea of the feeding the cases and patching the cases. So
yeah,
we're keen to. This whole thing came from the Feeding the Monster series. People were curious, kind of saw it over Chris's shoulder, the performance case, and so we'd really love to see what's in the performance case.
Yeah.
So that's simply why we're doing it. So leave feedback, let us know what you'd like to see, and we'll try and make it happen.
Yeah, it timed up nicely for me having to do another major overhaul of this case, including redoing the power and reworking some of the systems at it. There's several of these modules in here I've not used before, so
yeah,
it'll be an interesting week leading up to the patching episode next week. I'll fall back on some old tricks, but I'll show you like the Folktech Nano Garden in action, the delay chain, and some of the logic tricks, but also see if some of these new things I put in here work as intended or not.
Yeah. G asked, what's the name of the drum sample pack you talked about earlier, the hits and tails? It was a pack called Drum Construction for Loop Masters. The sub-label Quantum Loops, which is a sub-label by Dom Kane, who you may know from Mousetrap, Dead Mouse's label. He's a tech house producer, electro house producer. He's done a lot of presets for Moog over the years, kind of in that X for Records, Steve Duda, Dead Mouse type crowd. Dom is Welsh lad, a few hours from me, and I randomly messaged Dom one day saying, would you like to remix this DivKid track, back when DivKid was entirely a slightly more cheesy dance music project. He liked the tune, did a remix, asked where the drums came from, and that was my entry into making samples. There are no Quantum Loops packs on Loop Masters anymore, but I asked Dom if I could give them away, certainly on Patreon, and he said I'm welcome to. He had a whole kind of change of business plan. But there's lots of packs on Loop Masters and Sample Magic as well. Some of them are on my site, divkidvideo.com. Not all of them. That needs a bit of an update for older projects. But yeah, drum construction. And there was a load of like categorized kicks, deep kicks, tight kicks, punchy kicks. But then this like high mid tops, high mid tails, or was it transient body and tail, or high mids and subs? I can't remember quite what we called it, but this idea of piecing together samples is quite an interesting one. Do remind me on Patreon, because I can just throw those files up. I'd like to make a video about it though. We'll see. Yeah,
that's one idea that we've tossed around is, in terms of Ben and I doing videos on a monthly basis, maybe doing something on patching or patching challenges or patching ideas and explorations. And that would be a fun thing to maybe do, is explore that with some live patching and show how to layer stuff together on a modular.
Uncles of Wise, how heavy is the case?
I've not waited with the latest power supply and module configuration, but it used to be around 36 pounds, which is what, 17 kilos? I can't remember exactly. 16 kilos? Um, and that is about 6 pounds, a little over 6 pounds, 3.5, 4 kilos heavier than it would have been if I had used a more sensible road case. um, and I admit, I was a little bit too macho about it. The first time I traveled with it, I said, I will carry it. And the first flight I had to move between terminals and carry it between terminals. And during the layover, I was on Amazon, like need wheel cart.
Now.
And had it prime delivered to my destination before my next flight. But now I have a little wheel cart that I put it on and wheel it around, and that's not bad at all. I scare the hell out of people when I put it in the overhead above them in the seats because they're afraid it's going to fall on them. But other than that, yeah. It's not been too inconvenient.
Yeah, having lugged a very similar Lamond 12U case around across muddy festival fields where I can't use a little cat is no fun.
Oh.
No fun at all. In fact, there was quite a scene. There may be a picture somewhere. It was Sam Battle, Look Mum No Computer, Alex Myler Melodies, and myself at the Deershed Festival last year. And Sam's kind of, wellies, trailing through the mud, mad scientist vibe that Sam's got going on, which is great. And then just this like cart of gear, and it's all this big, like his own 5U format gear, just being trailed, the Furby organ, kind of caked in mud, being dragged along. And then Alex and I with modular cases and rucksacks on, like just caked in stuff. But good fun. We were working in the science tent together, so children and adults can come and play and have access to these things. And Sam was performing as well as I did that year. Alex gave a talk too. Sound Fettler, Whiskey Yuck, stick with the real ales. If we can get an equivalent nice title for some kind of real ale synth stream, Single Malt Synthesis was a nice little name from Constantine and Heimbach. Credit to them. I don't know of a real ale one.
There's got to be one with triggers and tequila somewhere in there we can make. I've become quite a margarita person, so.
Black Coffee Now says that the VCAM, the 4MS module, explains in the module why it has that kind of S log into exponential curve.
Cool.
Yeah, we'll go look at the manual for that. It sort of makes sense that if you use the bottom half for audio in the Matrix mixer. We'll see. We'll go read the manual for that one. Mark Booth, first time I've joined live and we'll try and join live again next week. So much useful info. Thank you very much. They are, I think, better enjoyed live where possible because we can interact like this. It feels like a thing together. It feels like a really great community, as did the previous Feeding the Monster streams. Thank you, Tobias. Thank you, FX Music.
But the playbacks have been kind of being online references for people now, I think.
I think the playback with what you're doing on Patreon then becomes this whole other kind of powerful reference to dive in.
Yeah.
So it's a really nice way to dissect it afterwards. Effects Music, Tobias and Warden, thank you very much for the super chat. Really appreciate that.
Thanks, guys.
And Jeremy as well. Just seeing these as I'm scrolling down. Sorry if they're taking a while. Patching ideas would be great. Yep, definitely next week is all about patch examples for this particular series. But going forward, yeah, some kind of patching thing between Chris and I. Can you lift it? Yeah, that was obviously to the weight of the case. Yes.
Yep, one hand.
Yeah.
I'll just point it for live. It comes with this big handle on top, but I also have added these little spring-loaded wing handles so I can carry it bucket size like this. But I've also found it's very important to put it in and out of carry-on on an airplane. To pull it out of carry-on,
2 hands.
You definitely need a handle on the side to pull it out lengthwise, as opposed to having a handle in the middle where you have to reach into the bin to get to it. And the top of the case even has sliders on it rather than rubber feet. So I put it that side down so it slides in and out rather than trying to drag rubber feet across the bin above us on the airplane.
We've some great names here. Christian Muller, CV Triggers and Shots. Holland Monday, the Pale Ale Pub Night. I like that one.
Ah, there you go.
Alpha Stare, Bloops and Brews. I like Bloops and Brews. That's a very Seattle thing.
Brews is good.
That'll probably exist. There's probably a Bloops and Brews, Bloops and Brews Modular night or something with some microbrewery in Seattle. It's a very Pacific Northwest, Portland almost. It's got a
modular mojito, modular margarita. There's gonna be something in there.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just scrolling through the chat, and I think I'm at the bottom of the chat, so we've reached 3 hours. We'll leave it there. I'll post some links just as we close up to our Patreon pages if you'd like to support. I'll pin the comment and also share here in the live chat the next stream, which is a week today. Do come armed with any questions. If you're a Patreon supporter for either of us and you can't make the stream, do feel free to ask a question beforehand. Both Chris and I'll try and prioritise getting those questions in specifically for people that support there. And I'll link the first episode that's already in the video description too. Anything you'd like to kind of close on, Chris?
No, except for, I've really enjoyed this. It all started as a lark in terms of, oh my God, the bassist is getting the band back together. What am I going to play? Let's try putting together my sample-based drum system as a modular system. And that was the genesis of this. And now it's really become an instrument where I'll compose songs to be played on this system, etc. It's, everyone's system is their own instrument. But this has become, for me, a really focused, this is how I think, this is the sounds I like. These are the movements I want to make while trying to improvise with other people. And I think a lot of people are surprised when I do take this case out and say, let's jam. I'll quite often just take it and go play with people I've never played before in front of an audience and just say, let's share a clock and let's listen, or I'll listen. And I really enjoy that. I think people need to do that more often. Modular can be quite a solo effort. And it's fun just to get out with someone else and make music together. And when you share a clock and you know your instrument and you listen to each other, you can do that.
Yeah. Both Alex and I, when we're working at the science tent at Deershed, we clock share. Pick a key if we can. Usually one of us has a quantizer. Or one of us will come kind of non-tonal or non-pitched so that we're a bit freer to jam together. And we just kind of change a mood for the day. There'll be a look, maybe there's a point where both Alex and I are free for a moment and there'll be should we drop down to 90-ish? Yeah, why not? And that kind of sits there for a bit. But the fact we're in our own little corner, I think, really does help. Well, it stops us driving each other crazy playing two opposing things on tables next to each other for a start.
Yeah.
Next episode there is in the live chat too. Cool. I think we have caught absolutely everything.
Good. Hey, thanks to everyone for bothering to humor us and to watch these series. I'm glad it's been useful. Just sharing the mental process that goes into building out cases like these.
Yeah. It's been really interesting for me as well. So thank you, Chris, for coming on. Thanks, everybody, for watching. And, yeah, as I say, leave comments. You'll find us wherever you want to chat, really. And we'll see you next time. Cheers.
See you in a week.